Good morning, members, good morning, guests, and welcome to a new term of the London Assembly. Did somebody say yeah? Yeah. Okay. To our guests, I'll come back to you in a moment. I just need to open the meeting formally. So let me start with item 1, and that is apologies for absence.
Yes, Chair, we've received apologies from Assemblymember Bacon, Assemblymember Dismore and Assemblymember Eshalomi.
Thank you.
And an apology for lateness from Assemblymember O'Connell.
Okay, thank you very much. And then for my announcements, I just wish to provide the Assembly with an update in relation to the work of some of its committees. Last Thursday, the Planning Committee published its well-received report on modular housing, undertaken by Assemblymember Gavron, calling on the Mayor to take an innovative approach to factory-built housing, and I'm pleased to say she launched it in my constituency, Borough of Hackney. We also published our annual report last week, which covers the work of the Assembly, and thank you to members who found the time to provide video clips so that we can promote that work. There were several other high-profile reports that came over the summer, including the Transport Committee's investigation on London Bus Network and the Economist Committee report on local newspapers in the capital. As the Assembly will be aware, today is the start of Amigo Month. We're all aware of that. Thank you. This is the annual period which commemorates the contribution to the UK of those with roots in the Hispanic and Lusophone world. And I'm pleased to say that we have in the audience with us today Mr. Isaac Biggio, who I think all of us, or the majority of us, will know of his wonderful work and the way that he spends most of his time promoting the interests of this community. Both Assembly member McCartney, let me start again. Our Deputy Mayor, Assembly member McCartney, I know spoke at a reception last night at the start of Amigo Month. And on behalf of the Assembly and the Mayor, we thank members of the Portuguese speaking community across London for their contribution to our great city. Thank you. Let's go to item 2. Can I ask the Assembly to note the recommendations set out at item 2? Do members have any other declarations to make relevant to the items on the agenda for today's meeting, including in relation to gifts and hospitality, which are not yet reflected on the Assembly's register? None? Thank you. Okay. Minutes, can I ask the Assembly to agree the minutes of the London Assembly's Mayor's Question Time meeting held on 10th August 2017 to be signed by me as a correct record? Thank you. And then we now move to today's principal business, a question and answer session with Liz Peace CBE, Chair of the Old Oak and Park Royal Development Corporation. Good morning, Liz, and welcome.
Good morning.
And Victoria Hills, who's been with us before, Chief Executive of the Old Park and Park Royal Development Corporation. And we will be referring to this great body today as the OPDC. Good morning and welcome,
Good morning.
Victoria. For those watching us not familiar with our way of working, for this session there are 4 lead-off questions, and Assembly members will ask supplementary questions after each question has been answered. Before the lead-off question, the Assembly will receive a short opening statement from the Chair and Chief Exec of OPDC, and that's in total, well, that's about 5 minutes in total. So over to you, Chair and Chief Exec.
Thank you very much indeed. In fact, I shall make the opening statement on behalf of both of us, I'm sure if I've got anything wrong, Victoria will kick me under the table. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak to you. I've been in post for just about 5 months, so quite an interesting and busy 5 months. Of course, the OPDC has actually been in existence now for 2.5 years, so I did inherit a fair amount of progress already. What I'd like to do is just set out very briefly what I feel we've achieved already, and then tell you a little bit about my plans for the next 6 months, because I'm sure in about 6 months' time I'll be back here in front of you to update you. I think in terms of our achievements, I'm very pleased with what we've been able to do. It's not just over the last 5 months, you know, this is actually sort of accumulation of work from the last 2.5 years. We've now moved our local plan on substantially. Our stage 1 consultation is completed. We moved on to our stage 2 consultation. That's actually underway. There have been a number of public meetings. The staff have been working very, very hard to actually get out and talk to the local people. We hope to have the local plan adopted in 2018. We finally appointed a master plan team. You might have thought that was something that we would have wanted to do some time ago. I think in an ideal world we probably would have done, but because of the hiatus in the chair situation, that didn't happen. We've now got them in. I've been very quick to emphasise to them, as has Victoria, that we don't want them to reinvent the wheel. We want them to pick up the good work that has already been done, and they are showing every signs of doing that, and I've been very pleased with what they've been able to show us so far. What I've got the team very focused on now is preparing a delivery plan. Well, you call it a business plan. I think probably delivery plan is better, a better term. And I'll talk a bit more about that in terms of what I hope to achieve in the next 6 months. But that's all about looking at what we can actually get moving quickly in the next 3, 4, 5, 6 years, rather than being sort of overwhelmed by the sorts of things we need to deliver in 20 and 30 years, which, you know, somehow... You never do anything if you're just thinking about 30 years. You've got to look at what you're doing, what you're doing in the near term. In terms of actually contributing to London's housing need, we have 2,700 homes actually consented on the patch as a whole. Now, that does actually include North Acton, and in fact, the OPDC Planning Committee has consented 1,016. So we are actually making some real progress. We have 1,500 live applications actually in the pipeline. They are applications that have been made. And in fact, I will be going out on site on the 29th of September with James Murray to actually put a spade in the ground on our first real housing development, which is at a site called Oakland South. The heavy stuff's on there already, knocking down the old existing buildings. So there's a sign of some real visible progress. I have embarked on a board refresh. I very, very nicely asked all the sort of central government folk who just came and sat to depart from the board so that we could actually get a few more... I wanted people who were more experienced in actually delivering a regeneration site, and that recruitment process is underway at the moment. We have a short list. All the central government people and other bodies people are still there. They're attending as observers because I think it's hugely important that we maintain our close relationship with them. But in terms of how the board functions, I really wanted people who knew how to deliver a regeneration site and had experience of that. We haven't forgotten Park Royal. There's a slight tendency to look at everything that needs to be done on the Old Oak half of the site. Park Royal is a fantastic asset for London. It could be a bigger asset, a better asset. There are things that need to be done there, and we are developing a Park Royal strategy. We did, in Victoria and her team, manage to secure £1.5 million from the HLF Great Places scheme, which will be handed out to us over 3 years, which will help us develop a sort of cultural offer around the centre of Park Royal. I think it's interesting, a lot of people say, Park Royal, culture, what are you talking about? But, you know, it's a terrific site, it's got some interesting buildings, it's got lively and vibrant businesses there. It does have a cultural offering, it needs some help pulling that together, presenting that to a wider world. We've also embarked on, continued with an extensive communications and engagement programme with all the people involved in Old Oak. And we've also worked very closely with HS2 to try and make sure their communications and engagement plan is actually delivering to the local people the information that they need. I actually found in my going out and about around Old Oak that the first and biggest thing that people were worried about was what impact the HS2 construction was going to have on their lives. Yes, of course they're concerned about what we're going to be doing on the bulk of the site, but the immediate problem is having a massive work site literally in their back garden. And I think we've been able to, in a way, broker a better communication between HS2 and the local people. And Victoria's met with the new Director of Engagement, Director of Community, I think she's called, at HS2, you know, to actually show HS2, explain to HS2 what the local people really need. And sort of in and out of all that and those achievements, I've spent a substantial amount of time just meeting people, walking the site, meeting all the different stakeholders. There's some I haven't met yet, and I will keep going with that. As you all know, it's very time consuming, you know, to actually make sure you meet everybody and we have the business back at the office. So that's our achievement so far. But I mean, this is a complex site. HS2 is now confirmed by the passage of the bill, so now an act that got royal assent in February. That, of course, is the catalyst for all this development. But we are going to need major infrastructure over and above HS2, which is not surprising if you look at any big regeneration site in London. If you look at Stratford, if you look at Barking Riverside, Nine Elms, they all need substantial infrastructure. And that needs a coordinated approach to land, to planning, to funding, which, frankly, the private sector on their own couldn't deliver. Not surprisingly, we've got lots of private sector interest. Lots of the developer world are sort of sniffing around looking for opportunities, but I don't believe we can take advantage of that until we have got our own sort of act together in terms of coordinating how we provide that massive infrastructure need. But of course the potential rewards are going to be very high. We will have a site, when we get all this done, broadly comparable to Barking Riverside. You know the figures, 25,500 homes eventually, which will make a massive contribution to the 60,000 per annum needed in London, 60,000 jobs, and then all the other things that will create a new destination, all the other social infrastructure. And, of course, we want this to be an exemplar type of development. We want it to be sustainable. We want it to be green. We want it to be low energy. We want it to be low car usage. And, of course, we want it to be well designed. I do not want to be building an area just dominated by glass and chrome skyscrapers that have no sense of place. So my immediate priorities for the next 6 months, I referred to the delivery plan, as I like to call it, or business plan. We haven't quite fixed on a final term for it. My concern when I came was that we were slightly overwhelmed by the enormity of what we were going to be trying to do over the next 20 to 30 years. And that actually what's really important in a regeneration project is doing something relatively soon. Show people you're there, you're in business, you mean business, and you're going to deliver. So what we've been working on with the team, with our master planning team from ACOM as well, is to look at what we can actually get cracking on in the next five to 6 years, to show people we mean business, to actually get spades in the ground and actually start delivering houses. That's what we're hoping to, finalise. It'll be a very iterative process, but we're hoping to have something publishable later in the autumn. We've got a draft. We'll be talking to our board about it, obviously talking a lot to the GLA about it, and put something out into the public domain later this year.
Thank you, Liz.
Sorry, I've gone on too long. Shall I stop there? Right. Okay.
Liz, thank you. I'm sure you'll be able to deliver what else you have on the sheet in response to questions. Can we now move to the first question? And the first question is in the name of Assembly Member Russell, entitled Healthy Streets in the Old Oak and Park Royal Development Corporation.
The paper, I can read it to you. How will you deliver the Mayor's vision for healthy streets in the Old Oak and Park Royal Development Corporation?
Well,
Could I actually put this question to Victoria?
yes, well, of course. I'll just kick off and then Victoria will answer the
Okay.
bulk of it if that's all right. And I think, as I alluded to earlier, well, this is a pretty virgin site in a sense. It's brownfield land, and even though it has lots of railway lines, we have got to plan the transport infrastructure. That allows us to do exactly what the Mayor wants in terms of delivering healthy streets. And that absolutely underpins the whole approach to our transport strategy. But Victoria, you talk about it.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. As set out, there is a fabulous opportunity here to have the ultimate healthy streets, if you like, because many of the streets that will exist in Old Oak aren't there currently, and the ones that are going to be removed or reconfigured. So we've been working very closely with Transport for London right from the get-go and the GLA's transport team here to understand the essence of the Healthy Streets proposal and to understand how not only Old Oak can emulate what the Mayor is trying to achieve in Healthy Streets, but how Healthy Streets can actually unlock the potential of Old Oak, because we're talking about a very dense future part of London, with very high levels of public transport accessibility. It's currently down in the sort of 1s and 2s P-Tower rating. By the time the HS2 station, Crossrail Super Hub with Great West Main Line opens in 9 years' time, you'll be up in the sort of 6+ territory. In fact, they may even have to invent a new level of rating for Old Oak. So there is an opportunity to be low car, zero car in part of it. There's an opportunity to promote connections between the various stations in a way that entices people to walk and cycle. Indeed, that's what we want to do, because there isn't a lot of space in this part of London to take vast amounts of new traffic. The best way for people to move around between some of the relatively short distances between the other stations is to walk or cycle. The best way to do that is to make it attractive, to encourage people to do. I'm sorry if I'm teaching you what you already know, but
I have
this is what
limited
we want to try
time,
and
so
do.
I'm just going to pause you there. Just checking, when you say you're working with the GLA team, does that include Will Norman, the Walking and Cycling Commissioner? Have you met with him? You said you were going to.
Because when we spoke last, you very rightly suggested I did. I have sat down and met with Will, and Will has already been extremely insightful as to what we need to do going forward. Indeed, he's helped us on various bids that we've made for cycling and walking infrastructure. So I have sat down with Will, and he is very excited about the opportunity here.
That's great. I'm going to pause you again. In March, you told us here at the Assembly that given the connectivity here, we really are talking about zero cars. Why should we really not go for it here? But the local plan that's come out recently in policy T4 on parking, it says you will limit car parking to 0.2 spaces per residential unit, and that you will strongly encourage car-free developments in areas between PTAL 4 and 6B. The rationale given is that car-free development cannot be supported until public transport infrastructure has been delivered. This doesn't look like it's totally ambitious. Can you not keep your zero-car ambition by providing, say, bus services until Crossrail infrastructure comes into place? And what does Will Norman have to say about going to 0.2?
Well, the policy quote is currently out for consultation. We're keen to hear views, yours and others. It's a starting point which we've been discussing extensively with TfL and the GLA, very much in conformity for similar developments in and around London. Should we be going more ambitious? Well, that's something that we'd be keen to discuss with you and others further. The reality is that the infrastructure isn't there at the moment, and schemes are coming forward right now. As Liz said, that the schemes will be consented. So there is an element of future-proofing, but very practically, how do people get around at this moment in time? And we're working very closely with TfL buses, who any members who've had experience of liaising with TfL buses know it's a very rigorous process to ensure that their network requirements are fully thought through. So we take the point on board. It's an open consultation.
If you could look at the provision of interim, small buses that could actually get over the need for waiting for Crossrail to come on, because otherwise you might miss some of these amazing opportunities you've got. Just a slightly technical thing about PTALs, which you've mentioned. There are some limitations to PTALs. These are the public transport accessibility level measurements for people who are watching the broadcast. They've got arbitrary cut-offs in terms of the distance from public transport stations and stops. And the healthy streets potential for people to walk and cycle for those short neighbourhood trips is often ignored. In fact, Liz was talking about how she'd been walking all over the site, so it is doable. In Camden, they're combining PTAL measurements with ATOS, which is access to opportunities and services. It's an alternative method for measuring transport connectivity, which can give you a more nuanced picture for decision making. Will you look at the Camden case and consider using ATOS as well as PTAL for your decision-making processes?
Well, I mean, the Camden example you cite is of most interest. If TfL aren't already looking at that more broadly, then I'd be more than happy to raise that with them and ask them to look at it for this site. It is a unique site.
Fantastic.
Whether we'll reach agreement with them that that's the right solution or not, I can't comment
but
on that.
But that's agreement to look at it, and that's fantastic. Yeah. Given the heavy reliance on private vehicles in Park Royal, do you think this is an ideal location to have a workforce parking levy? Have those discussions between OPDC, the boroughs and TfL taken place?
Workforce parking levy specifically for Park Royal is not a current topic of discussion with businesses. That's not to say that it won't be in the future, but the starting point for Park Royal businesses, many of them feel there are some other improvements that they might like to see first before they're starting to pay for parking. I'm going to be brutally honest about it. We're talking about sort of decades of underinvestment in their infrastructure. They've got some very basic needs on broadband, on electricity, and it's going to be quite difficult to have a conversation to say they've got to pay for something more before we can actually help to get them improvements in the short term. So indeed, I'm meeting with the chair of the Park Royal Business Group this afternoon to talk about how we can progress some of these discussions. We're not ruling anything in or out at this stage, and we'll certainly take that way and have a look at it. But we've got some...
Do please, because in Nottingham, the workplace parking levy actually paid for the installation of a whole new tram system, so that the businesses who were paying for the parking through the workplace parking levy started to get, the benefits of an alternative piece of infrastructure for travelling into work. So it was sort of benefit to those businesses specifically and the people working in those businesses. So
but I do think we need to sort of look at the Park Royal situation as a whole. I do worry it has been a bit sort of neglected because we've been focusing on the other half. We're trying to sort of get the relationship with the Park Royal Business Group, a bigger, more vigorous sort of engagement so that we can look at their total needs. And, I'm sure we'll take this into account, but second what Victoria said,
I have one more question for you before I run out of time. I've read in the draft local plan about upgrades to the strategic road network. I assume you're aware of what happened when the Westway was widened in 1970. Traffic more than doubled in a decade along the Westway corridor. That's not just along the Westway, it's along a whole network of streets around the Westway. So please tell me you're not going to do something like this. My question is, how would, if that means road widening, how would road widening be helping the Mayor to hit his traffic reduction targets in the Mayor's transport strategy?
I mean, let's just be very clear. We're not the Highways Authority. We take our lead absolutely from the Mayor's Strategic Transport Authority, Transport for London. They've extensively looked at the network, what's required and what's not. They're not in the business of big road building for road building's sake. Indeed, they don't have the budgets for that. Your reading of strategic upgrades to the SRN, I think, relates more to some strategic interventions on being able to cross the network, on rephasing of traffic signals, those sorts of things, rather than really large road widening. I can't sit here and tell you forensically what's in their roads investment programme, but I'll certainly take it away and clarify that for you.
It would be worrying to hear, the profits from the development being used to widen the roads, which then might ruin the area in terms of healthy streets by swamping it with lots of extra traffic.
But we do need new roads in some places. And you know, they will be built to the standard that TfL specifies.
So long as they're
And
built
but it will have to take into account the overall, fit into our overall transport strategy, our overall strategy. For the
So
site.
long as, yes, I mean, the transport
Thank
strategy
you.
is
Thank
clear
you.
about healthy
Assembly
streets.
Member Russell. Thank you. Okay. Assembly Member Copley.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning. I also have a few questions on the Healthy Streets agenda. The Mayor's draft transport strategy says it is essential that the new street network is developed using the Healthy Streets approach to make walking and cycling the first choice across the area. It also says high quality and reliable bus links to and through the area from existing residential communities will also be required to ensure that everyone benefits from the proposals at Old Oak. How do you balance the competing demands for road space from both these priorities? Between
walking, cycling and buses?
walking, cycling and the need for bus connectivity as well.
I mean, the two have to work hand in hand. When you're planning a new network, essentially, and I've been very clear with Transport for London and the team that we deal with, that the bus network's going to need a complete reconfiguration. When you've got the largest new build station to have ever been built, subsurface to have ever been built in the UK, opening up in a quite densely populated part of West London anyway, you're going to have to reconfigure the bus network. That's the starting point. You can't carry on as currently is, because there's going to be a lot of people coming into and wanting to change onto Crossroad, but not everybody's going to be getting on the Elizabeth line. Many people are going to want to do other things in West London. Indeed, we hope they do, in the place that we are planning on helping to develop out. I don't think the two are mutually exclusive. They work very much hand in hand, walking, cycling and bus. Indeed, one feeds the other, if I may. Bus use increases if people can get to buses, and the best way to get to them is by walking or parking a bike or bike hire, etc. So I don't see them as competing for road space. There may be other modes that are competing, but I think they can be planned, and the beauty here is we are planning them from the start. They can be planned to work together. So I'll give you an example of one of the bridges over the Grand Union Canal we're looking at. We've been very clear, and TfL very clear, we're absolutely at one, that the priority is for pedestrians, cyclists and buses, and the only cars that will go on that bridge are through traffic. Not through traffic, sorry, that's a slip, are residents of the development. There won't be any through traffic. So we're absolutely hand in glove with TfL on this. We're the planning authority. I think there's a great opportunity to get it right. It's not going to be easy, but I hope that goes some way to answer your question.
I'd have a follow-up as well on car parking spaces, which Assemblymember Russell raised. Do you have a target for how many spaces will have an electric charging point?
I can't give you a figure, but we've made it very clear in the local plan that we will be prioritising spaces for electric charging, but we have to have the flexibility, because electric charging may be the big thing at the moment, and it may continue to be the big thing, but there may be other modes of transport that evolve over the life of this development. So I can't sit here and give you an absolute figure, but what I can do is confirm the policy that we have in the local plan, which is of course supportive of that ambition. I think my own personal view on cars is in 15-20 years time we'll see much more of the sharing economy in any event, and autonomous vehicles, whether they're electric or powered in some other way, could feature in this development, and there's an opportunity to plan for that.
Okay, let's go to the second question in the name of Assembly Member Shaw. And that is, what are the key factors for fulfilling the OPDC's vision for a successful Old Oak Common?
Thank you very much. Well, I'll kick off, and Victoria will no doubt come in when we get into sort of more of the detail. I think there's four things, not necessarily in order of priority. They're all important. I think we have to have a clear plan. That is absolutely clear. I think we have to have political support at every level, local, regional and national, and you never attract people to invest in an area unless you know that there is strong political support. We need stakeholder buy-in, and that is from a range of people, including TfL, GLA, the 3 local boroughs, HS2, government departments, local communities and the landowners, and we need them all fully engaged in the process. And then we need funding for the infrastructure. I think I spoke about this at my confirmatory hearing, that actually getting the infrastructure that we need built is going to be very challenging, and we have to look to a number of different sources for that. We can't expect the public sector to pay everything, and there are some people, some private sector developers, who will be making profits out of what happens on this site, and we need to be looking for how we get them to contribute to the infrastructure as well. But they won't go in the first place unless you've got a clear plan and good political support and support from all the other stakeholders. So those 4 things are very much interrelated.
Okay.
Anything you want to add to that?
You want to add anything?
I think just to just make a further point on this sort of buy-in and working with partners, one of the key factors, when we go back to sort of why we're all here, is the fact that HS2 is coming. It's not the only reason, of course. It's a very well connected part of London anyway, and if HS2 were cancelled tomorrow, there would still be a phenomenal opportunity for development. But nevertheless, HS2 is the Olympic factor, if you like. So it's working with HS2 to get the very best of that opportunity. That's how you can fulfil a successful Old Oak Common. And by that I mean ensuring that the station is designed in a way that facilitates the Mayor's vision, future-proofs this opportunity, and is well connected into the existing neighbourhoods and communities, of which you're a representative of one of them, and you'll be keen that your residents can benefit from this phenomenal access, and that it's not an island site merely to facilitate interchange between the north and the south of England.
Liz, you mentioned that master planning team is in place now, and indeed OPDC has made substantial and steady progress in terms of building up the team in the last year. Can I ask you whether do you have now the capacity to ensure that the land transfer negotiations, master planning process and higher rate than expected of forthcoming planning applications can be managed without failing to maximize opportunities as well as hampering the vision itself?
Well, I think if you're talking specifically in terms of the resource available to the team at OPDC, yes, I am confident. I mean, regrettably, people change, and we are going to lose two of our directors. I'm afraid one's emigrating to Australia. I've tried to persuade him not to, but he's insistent that he is going. We will have to recruit new people, but I think we have a good structure. I think we have the right support. I think our consultants that we have been using through the master plan process, ACOM, and they've brought in a raft of other subsidiaries to meet particular needs of the master planning process, including a company called GVA who can help on the sort of economic planning side. We have already, in advance of getting the master plan team in, been using Deloitte Real Estate, so they've been able to give us some strong help on the economics and what we can expect from the various things. So I am confident we have the team to deliver.
Yeah, the 2016 review mentioned that OPDC didn't have the staff resource to carry out and have the capacity to forward land deal work, and that you would seek expert help. That isn't the case any longer.
We have the expert help available. We also, and I think this is a very sensible thing to do, are using the GLA resources as far as we can. Now, that's always been the case since OPDC was set up. So all the support services, pretty much, yes, all of them, come from the GLA. But we're also in discussions with the land and, I think, is it called the Housing and Land team, David Lunt's team within the GLA, for them to provide us additional support we need as and when we get to the point of actually perhaps wanting to buy land if we need to, and actually helping us with the relationship with potential developers. So, and I think, again, this is something I said at my confirmatory hearing, there's no point OPDC doing things that actually GLA can do, have already got a team and can help us support. So discussions on how that will work out in practice are going on at the moment.
Liz, can I explore with you in detail the issue about land deal arrangements?
About, sorry?
The land deals.
Land deals,
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
yes, okay.
You told the Architects Journal that you wanted the master planning team to start from where we are and not go right back to its beginning. Do you believe the land deal struck by the previous mayor and his deputy achieved the best interest for London? And what progress have you made in establishing the recommendations of this mayor's review?
So you're talking now about the deal that was brokered with the DFT, Department for Transport, and the MOU concerning the public sector land, which is effectively Network Rail and HS2 land. I've talked to the DFT, I've talked extensively to Network Rail. I don't actually think this is a bad deal. We get access to this land at existing use value. Existing use value, and I think there are issues around sort of nailing that as quickly as possible, is okay, because there's phenomenal development potential on all this land, out of which both we and central government, Network Rail, DFT, whoever it is, we can share the proceeds. I think the important thing to do over the next 6 months is to actually, just trying to think of the sort of best phrase, to establish a way of actually cementing the intention behind that MOU, so that we actually deliver the sites at the right current value with the appropriate sharing of future proceeds.
Yeah, in that Architects Journal interview last month, you also stated that looking at the existing land settlement, the high-level review was a priority. That review made a number of recommendations around the land transfer. Could you update us on those?
Yes. Well, that's pretty much what what I was just alluding to, because the review, the OPDC review, suggested that we should look again at whether this deal could be renegotiated. Now, I think there are always dangers of trying to renegotiate deals with central government. Central government at the moment is fairly preoccupied with a lot of other things. As I say, I don't actually think that deal is fundamentally a bad one, and what I think we need to do is look at how we, the phrase I used was to cement it, and this is what I would like to do over the next 6 months, so that we have a sort of son of MOU, a subsidiary agreement that says, right, these are the sites, these are the existing use values, this is what's going to happen to them, this is how we're going to share any subsequent development proceeds. That's one of my tasks for the next 6 months.
Yeah. Have you had opportunity to discuss potentially transferring land to the north of the site to aid coordinated development in this area?
Yes.
With central government?
Absolutely, and the delivery plan that we're looking at, notwithstanding the fact that we're working closely with HS2 on what they're doing at the station, so that we don't close off any future options for development around the station, given the fact that the station is going to, the actual building of the station is effectively going to sterilise the south part of the site for a number of years, we're actually keen to get started on the northern part of the site, North Old Oak Common, and that's exactly what we're looking at in this delivery plan that we're preparing, how we can actually get moving on some of those sites further to the north, which are well away from the HS2 construction. Yeah,
in conjunction with that, is the OPDC also exploring acquiring small private plots again in the north of the site?
Yes, I mean, this is... yes, I was going to say we've got a question later on about land resources, which I think Assembly Member Bailey is going to ask, but I'm quite happy to answer it now. Yes, I mean...
No.
If you can just...
you can defer that answer and wait for Assembly Member Bailey's question.
Chair, I'll be happy to listen to that when it comes along. Thank you very much.
That's all right, I'll do what the Chair tells me.
Thank you. Absolutely.
Assembly Member Pigeon.
Thank you. I've got 3 specific questions I would like to ask you. To fulfil your vision, your modelling shows you're going to need a nursery in place by 2020 and another 2 years later. I'm pleased you've made progress on this in your work. We're rapidly approaching 2018 now. Are you confident the funding's going to be in place and that they will be completed on time?
I think I'm going to defer on this specific one to Victoria.
Well, you're absolutely right. That is what it has been identified. Of course, a lot of it is contingent on how quickly we can encourage the developers to get going with all of this. And there is a much broader conversation on education provision, which we're having with the local authorities in any event, as to whether that early years provision should be standalone or whether it should be part of a wider offering. And we've got a good working assumption now with the local authorities in terms of which schools need to be provided when, and also the broad location. What you're asking is, do we have the sort of very detailed delivery plan, which is soon to let a contract for that? We're not there yet, but there's an awful lot of work going on in place in support of that. Will we be where we need to be by the time we need to be? Yes, we will be, but it is contingent on how quickly we can encourage many of these consents we've noted today to actually get on and build. As the planning authority, we're in a very strong position to ensure that the commitments that we've secured through Section 106 are delivered. And that's probably all I need to say.
Okay, but I think in terms of childcare, you've got to build that in. If you've got family housing, there's no point if you want to encourage families there. Another area in terms of your vision, I think your plans for secondary care, to be honest, are lacking. It's clear A&Es in London are struggling. Charing Cross, 30 minutes away, is the nearest A&E. 29% increase in the past 2 years. What are you doing specifically to increase A&E capacity to support your development?
Well, you'll be aware of the various reviews that have happened and are underway and ongoing in relation to A&E in this particular part of West London. And we take them very seriously. That's why I've appointed a part-time public health specialist, not only to mainstream health planning through the development and everything we do, but to actually be able to enable us to have the correct conversation with the various stakeholders, because it's NHS England, it's the CCGs, it's on and on. I mean, it's multiple parties and partners. Our position is very clear. We're not the commissioning authority. We are not the provider of. We are there to support the organisations that make the decisions on A&E and where the investment goes, what stays open, what doesn't, what moves. Those decisions are not taken by us. We're part of the conversation in influencing where we think facilities should go, but it's not for us to get heavily involved in the specific A&E.
I think you do. This is about the support services for your 25,500 new homes. So I think you need to be more than just feeding into consultation. I think you need to be more actively at the table on these discussions. And I hope perhaps you will be going forward. Can I just start one final area? Crossrail Depot. The recently built Crossrail Depot at Old Oak cost 142 million, but in order to maximise your potential at Old Oak South, you're going to have to retrofit it or demolish it. Estimates around say it could cost 500 million. What are you looking at, and how much do you estimate it will cost to deliver?
I'm not, is the answer. I think, and this is one of the decisions I took very early on, that it would be very easy to become very distracted by the whole issue of the Crossrail depot. It is sort of there and unmissable, and it's not going anywhere for a while, and therefore I decided we needed to live with it for the foreseeable future. Now, TfL have been asked by the Mayor to examine options, and I'm very happy to work with them to do that. But for the moment, I think if we concentrate on the north of the site and actually look at what is achievable and deliverable there, we will make a whole lot more progress than spending time trying to do something which realistically nobody is ever going to put up the amount of money we need to do what you've just said. I mean, I'd heard 1.5 billion actually, but somebody was bandying around. If I had 1.5 billion, I could think of quite a few other ways of spending it very, very usefully in Old Oak Common. So I think, in summary, we are where we are. We have to learn to live with it for the immediate future. Who knows where we're going to be in 15, 20 years' time? And we are talking about a 20 to 30-year plan for OPDC. So, all manner of different things may happen way on into the future with the Crossrail depot, with the contracts for the trains, with use for other depots and everything. So I think it's a distraction.
Thank you, very clear. Thank you very much.
Assembly Member McCartney.
Thank you. I want to ask about the National Audit Office report last year. It was reported in that report that the DFT had asked HS2 to assess the impact of extending the timetable for phase 1 by up to 12 months. I'm just wondering what impact that would have on your development schedule.
I wasn't aware of that. Would you like to?
Yes, it was the NAO report was taking a good look at how HS2 was spending their money. It's the largest, costliest infrastructure project, not the costliest in the country, but certainly transport infrastructure project for many decades. And they took a close look at whether you could rephase things. If you delay things, would you save money? That, from our perspective, is absolutely a decision for the Secretary of State for Transport. HS2 and DFT's position to us currently is clear, which is 2026 is the date that they're working to. All the big contracts they're letting and procuring, whether they be on station design, the major civils works, are all working to a 2026 date. Our position is we will be as flexible and work with HS2 on anything they would like us to work on. So if they're going to move the date by a year and push it back a year, what does that mean for the early priorities which Liz has set out? Well, our focus is on the north, absolutely, over the next 15, 20 years. And will that impact the delivery of homes in the north in the short term? No, I don't think so. Will it impact the confidence? Well, if you're an investor, you might be scratching your head a bit about why they delayed it a year. We all know Crossrail was delayed by a year. These infrastructure schemes often get delayed. A year is neither here nor there in these major projects. If it got delayed 5 years, that's a different story. But currently, we're working on the assumption there is no delay, and that's what DFT and HS2 tell us. We're working with them on that, so that's where we are.
Okay. And the planned station at Old Oak Common, the schedule for delivering that is dependent on HS2 getting access to the Great Western depot from this December. Do you know if that's on track to happen?
Well, I mean, we're not in the day-to-day detailed delivery, but I do know that I do know that the Great Western part of it is absolutely crucial. I do know that the bill has provided them with the powers to move and relocate that depot. And what HS2 tell us is that everything is absolutely on track. Indeed, I think they're getting out on site this autumn specifically for that. And some members may be aware that the Great Western Railway celebrated 111 years of existence last Saturday and chose Old Oak as the depot to have that celebration. And that was really them starting to say goodbye to Old Oak. There's a lot of sentimental feeling attached with this significant depot. They're gearing up to move. As far as we're aware, it's all on track.
In fact, I think last week when you were on holiday, I met the director of the station development for Old Oak, working for HS2, and he was clear that their timetable was absolutely on track. He didn't mention that specifically, but he didn't say anything was changing to alter that.
That's very reassuring. My last question then is to you, Liz, if I may, and that's that National Audit report stated that the 55.7 billion funding package does not cover all the activity needed to deliver the promised growth and regeneration benefits, which is the responsibility of the local authorities, and that there is a risk that these benefits will not materialise if funding cannot be secured. So I'm going to ask you, how confident are you that you'll be able to secure all the funding that's required to make a success of the regeneration around Old Oak?
Well, I'm very familiar with this whole issue because having sort of cut my teeth on the HS2 project in Birmingham, it is exactly the same issue. You know, HS2 have got a funding package which pays for so much. If as a local authority or a local planning authority you want something bigger and better, and invariably you do in terms of stations, because the HS2 guys are designing a functional station. If you want to make something more of it, or you need extra transport links, you've got to pay for them. So yes, this is not a surprising comment. Like all our infrastructure requirements at OPDC, it's not going to be easy. Trying to persuade people to cough up the cash we need, and looking at every device at our disposal. And I think part of doing that is to be very realistic about our extra needs, our infrastructure needs, and infrastructure in the broadest sense, and have a very clear, itemised, prioritised and costed plan. Because if you tend to go into the Treasury saying, I need, sort of umpteen billion, they sort of, well, you scare them away straight away, and anyway, they don't like to talk vagaries. So I think it's all about being very clear about what we need when and how much it's going to cost. And when I say the minimum available, not over-egging it, being absolutely realistic about what things you specifically need to unlock specific sites. So in terms of confidence, I wouldn't say I'm overconfident, because it will be a struggle, but I believe we will be able to convince the bodies that I hope are going to help us that it is a project that they need to help us on. Would you like to add anything,
No,
Victoria,
I think
on that?
that's right.
Assemblymember Cooper.
Thank you very much, Chair. I wondered if I could ask you, Liz, about the governance issues. In particular, are you confident that the OPDC has the correct governance arrangements and the capacity to simultaneously negotiate public land transfer and coordinate the development now occurring on private land?
Yes.
And, well, that's a very succinct answer. Is there anything you might want to add to that?
No, I mean, in terms of governance and our board, I think we're in the process of strengthening the board in the areas where I think it was perhaps weak. Now, I'm not in the business of saying you've got to fill a board with lots of sort of rampant private sector property types, but on the other hand, I want on our side, on the board, people who are perfectly capable of eyeballing some of the people we are going to have to negotiate with, and telling them they must be kidding and we must have a better deal. So I think that will help immensely. What I'm hoping to do, and it will sort of slightly depend on who exactly we appoint following the competitive process, is to establish, well, we do have an investment committee, but it's never sort of functioned so far. We will have a new investment committee which will look specifically at the propositions that members of the private sector will be putting in front of us. And as I say, I want people who are able to say they must be joking. We want something better. So I think that side of it we will be strengthening. I think the existing the setup with the basic governance stuff that every board is responsible for, audit, remuneration, I think has been working exceedingly well, and I haven't seen anything that causes me concern in that direction, and I have a lot of experience of this both from public bodies and from the private sector, and I think the governance there is fine. I mean, in some ways we have an extra layer of governance because then also we report into the GLA. I meet GLA people from different parts of the relevant parts of the GLA on a regular basis. They monitor our spending. They keep a very close eye on what we're actually doing. So I do think we are governance sufficiently well.
I mean, obviously, the Mayor did a high-level review last year that came out in October. Can you foresee anything specific that you would be changing in terms of board membership that flows from that? And one of the things that was recommended was an extra seat on the board for Hammersmith and Fulham Council. Is that likely to be implemented? You've talked about strengthening it for the private sector side. What about the other aspects of the board and that balance there?
Yes, I think the specific recommendation was an extra seat on the planning committee for Hammersmith and Fulham, and we've actually already done that. Okay. Given that they have the lion's share of the site, that seemed to be an extremely sensible thing to do. That's actually happened. The principal part of the change to the board, the review suggested that all these government departments sending along people, were rather sort of packing out the board with government departments, basically. So we've already done that. They've all stood down. They've all become observers. They all have observer status. And I'm doing, again, the inference of all that was to strengthen the non-executive element of the board with people with the right expertise. So I'm appointing to 3 posts at the moment. I started off thinking that perhaps I might be looking for 3 sort of property development type people. I think in practice, because we've had some very good people with a range of expertise, I might even be looking for somebody with a greater degree of sort of housing, social housing expertise, which I think, given the challenges of the social housing agenda, would be helpful. But also refreshing the board's an ongoing process. People come and go. Our academic from Imperial College, he's also emigrated. We seem to have an effect on people wanting to go to Australia, and we will be replacing him in due course.
Can I just ask you, you did refer earlier on when you expanded on your initial very succinct answer to the relationship with the GLA. Can you unpack a bit the relationship with Homes for Londoners as well as the other parts of the GLA bodies, particularly around the land deal, and when do you actually expect the public land transfer to be completed?
Well, the idea with the Homes for Londoners team, David Lunt's team within the GLA, was that they could provide the expertise needed when we actually came to acquiring land and looking at development agreements. That still stands. We have actually sort of closed down our element of staffing that did that. David is going to take it on. I am in discussion, in fact Victoria is in detailed discussion with him, with a SLA, looking at how they will provide that level of expertise. Again, we're talking about land acquisition, I think, in one of the subsequent questions. So I'll cover the sort of philosophy of land acquisition when we get to that, if I may. But I've no reason to think at the moment that we won't broker a perfectly sensible SLA with the GLA to provide us with that level of capability.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Duval.
Very much. Can we go back to the Crossrail depot? Do you both agree with Sir Terry Farrell's comments where he says the failure to plan to deck over the Crossrail depot represents London's worst cock-up in 50 years?
I can possibly comment on it. I've spoken to Terry Farrell about this. He's bent my ear about it. I have some sympathy. I mean, maybe if one was starting with a clean sheet of paper, one would not want the Crossrail depot and the stabling that goes with it to be where it is. But as I said earlier, it is where it is, and I think it is a distraction and a potential massive waste of resource to worry about decking over it. So I don't agree with his comment about the failure to deck over it, because I think that's just going to be a huge waste of money.
So you think it's going to be a...
Well, your comment specifically related to our failure to agree to deck over the thing. I just don't think that's realistic.
Okay.
I mean, I would just add that we're talking about decisions that were taken nearly a decade ago. Hindsight's a wonderful thing. I mean, just coincidentally, we have actually had an apology from Sir Terry Farrell for some of for the nature of the wording that he used, because I think in hindsight him and his team recognised that was a bit inflammatory, and we are a new authority, we're 2.5 years old, so to sort of chuck that accusation through that it was the worst planning whatever for 50 years, you're talking to the wrong people really. The decisions were taken 8, 9, 10 years ago by different authorities, and if anything the accusations should be, if there are any, should be sort of directed their way. We're here to make the best of what the situation is, and as Liz said earlier, there's more than enough 15 to 20 years worth of development to get on with in the north of the site. As long as we can get access to that station, that's our priority.
So it's access to the station really isn't a viable option in your view then, to look at the air rights over that depot?
Well, the air rights to the depot are actually in the MOU.
Oh,
they are there. So they're there for future consideration, but at the moment our priority is elsewhere, and ensuring that the north can access.
I mean, if a private sector developer, and it probably wouldn't be a UK one, if a related or the Chinese Investment Corporation or somebody came along and said we're happy to put £1.5 billion into decking over the Crossrail depot so that we could build something on top of it, well, we might actually sit down and take them seriously, but frankly they'd be mad in my view.
And the right time to do that is when the depot is being developed, I presume. If it's later, it's the disruption wouldn't happen.
Well,
it just isn't going to happen.
I don't know about you, but I mean, have you seen this depot? I mean, it's
vaguely
it's pretty sort of substantial. So the idea of sort of building a sort of cocoon around it so that you can build over it, when who knows what the transport requirements might be in 15 or 20 years' time, doesn't seem to me to be a very good use of anybody's resources. So I think it's just much more sensible to be pragmatic. We are, as Victoria said, we are where we are. I mean, what we will do is encourage, you know, as our planning goes on, to look at ways in which you can screen it off, you can, you know, so people won't know there's a great depot bit behind. We make sure that there is still access across the various ranks of railway tracks that are there, and we work with where we are, and I think that's just the more sensible thing to do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Assemblymember Copley.
Thank you very much, Chair. I wanted to ask you about the levels of affordable housing, and specifically London affordable rent, which is the Mayor's new form of tenure that's going to be set at benchmarked at social rent levels. Are you going to have a target specifically for London affordable rent across the OPDC site?
Our target is the Mayor's target, so it has been made quite clear to me that, you know, I am chairing and Victoria is leading a mayoral development corporation, and the Deputy Mayor for Housing has said quite explicitly to me that I should be delivering what the Mayor wants. So that's our starting point.
So your starting point is going to be for 50% affordable housing across the OPDC?
I think I'm right in saying the 50% sort of from day one is public land. The Mayor will concede or accept 35% total of the total package of affordable housing. On,
I see. So there's a long-term strategic target,
land.
But then within the viability...
He has an aspiration to move that 35% to 50%. So, you know, one has always got to have that in the back of one's mind. And I mean, the discussions with the private sector have always been around the fact that you need something of a sort of lead-in to get from 35 up to 50 on private land, because obviously land banks have already been purchased at a certain price.
Assemblymember Copley, let me just draw your attention to Assemblymember Curtin question about the percentage of homes built on the OPD site. So if you would
you like me to bring it back?
If you would veer away from Assemblymember Curtin's question, that would be helpful.
I shall do my best, Chair.
Or come in after his question.
I will come in after a second.
Thank you so much. Assemblymember Shaw.
Thank you, Chair. May I raise an issue about locality versus density impact? The question is that how can the OPDC produce a successful local destination from the start of this project, given the tensions that there are or there will be resultant from densities and heights required to fund this national rail interchange?
Okay, I'll start with that, and then I'm going to defer to Victoria. I can see exactly what's behind your question. I come past Nine Elms every day. I come into London on the train, and I think high density can look overwhelming and can be very undermining of the wish to create a sense of place, space, and decent urban realm. So as far as I'm concerned, this is all about getting the design right, and then being very rigorous in enforcing in using our power as the planning authority. It is perfectly possible to have high density with good design, and the high density versus height. Actually, I think that's an interesting question. I've specifically asked ACOM to come back to me on that one and say, you know, could you show me the chapter and verse on the relationship between the two? Because actually people say places like Pimlico are extremely dense in terms of development, you know, Thomas Cubitt and all that sort of 19th century stuff, without going high. On the other hand, some places might actually support a high building. It turns out to be a good feature. It becomes a sort of good point of architecture. So this is all going to be in the planning, both of the buildings of themselves and of the spaces around them. And I so strongly believe this is an issue also, you know, about the spaces, the ground level, making the what you put above the ground sort of acceptable and putting it together as a piece of good urban design. So I think it's possible, but I think we have to be very vigilant to make sure we get what we want.
I am encouraged.
Well, I'll just add to that to say that absolutely placemaking is very much at the heart of this. Our head of urban design has been pulling together a compendium of all of the very best in class dense developments in London that aren't necessarily tall. Some of the best, densest developments are in places like Hackney and Camden. They're not tall towers. They've just been designed very well. And it's about putting in those high-quality urban realm places. Some of them may be green places, some of them are other types of urban realm. And it's access through to Wormwood Scrubs as well, because we've got one of London's best-known secret parks. It's hard to use by anybody, but it's huge. It's not far off the size of Regent's Park, and it's a Hyde Park away from Hyde Park. And if you can get access into that and open it up for the community, I think that will be a real sense of place-making and an immediate benefit for the local community.
I'm encouraged by both your response in terms of high density should mean high rise. That's great, and I hope that you're successful in implementing and will be watching like hawks on that. That's guaranteed. The question is that whatever we do, it will be a very different suburb than known to West Londoners, particularly in that Zone 3 area. How can neighbouring communities, for example, the ones in Brent, which who can influence as well as prepare for this change? How can we empower my local communities?
Well, I'm going to let Victoria answer the bulk of that, but I'll just say in my 5 months being involved with the OPDC, I have actually been hugely impressed at the efforts that have been made to reach out to the surrounding communities. It seems to me to have been exemplary. And by the way, to the point that a number of the local communities have sort of come to us and said they want us to sort of handle their discussions and interaction with HS2 because they think we do it well. We said no because you've got to get HS2 in that. But I think the team have done an extraordinarily good job. I think we're also very conscious of the fact that this site has been something of an island at the moment. Nobody could get in or out of it. I mean, nobody knows it's there and knows what to go there for anyway, unless you want to buy a second-hand car. So I think it's going to be really important in this connectivity. So, for instance, across the railway lines at Willesden Junction, so that you bring the people at Harlesden and north of Willesden Junction, you connect with them so that they feel that this is part of their neighbourhood as well. But I'm going to let Victoria fill in on.
Thank you. Can you please drop me a line about this, Victoria? I've run out of my time, please.
Yeah, well, or come in and see us.
I was just going to add, of course, we do have the leader of Brent on our board, so Brent residents are well represented on everything we do.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Assembly Member Gavron.
Victoria, I want to ask a few questions about the industry and business premises and land in the OPDC area. You have there the largest concentration, probably in Western Europe, of business and, broadly speaking, industrial premises and land. And it is arguably the engine of London and the UK's industrial economy. Now, I think it's very far-sighted of you that you've taken out an Article 4 direction to block the change of use to housing overnight from warehousing and from offices. When did that come into force as a direction?
You can explain the technicalities.
I only want to know just when it came into
Victoria
force.
has some good news on that.
Well, I think I do. I may be shot down in flames by my planning director at this moment in time, but we had a planning committee last night and the committee confirmed it. So it's, as far as I'm aware, it's come into force today.
But then
So it's
there's
coming into force today.
Then there's
Excellent.
a time lag.
I've got quite a lot of things I want to get to. It's coming into force today. That's excellent. Do you have a handle, though, on how many offices and how much warehousing you've already lost?
Yes, it is actually just a handful.
It's what?
It's only a handful. We were extremely fortunate to have got in early, actually.
That's really good. It's good to know.
Because we can see, you'll be aware of them case studies all over London where that isn't the case.
Okay, that's
We're
great.
talking about a small number.
Okay, it's really good to hear. Why, this month, at the end of this month, the government's bringing in another permitted development rule change, which allows any light industrial premise to be changed into a house or development, residential development overnight. And we know these are bypassing the planning system, so they'll undermine your ideas for comprehensive regeneration. So why haven't you applied for an Article 4 direction for that?
Well, I'm not in favour with the exact. I'm not in favour with the exact permitted development change you're talking about. But we'll take
Comes
that away
in
urgently.
on September the 30th.
Yes, I mean, I will take that way urgently to look. It may be that our direction does cover that, but we need to look at that urgently.
But it would be very good to know if you're going to take one out, because I would have highly recommended. Many boroughs are now doing that because it's very threatening. Now, given the tremendous pressures on industrial land across London and industrial premises, you're thinking, I know, of relocating some of your industries into the strategic location, what's called a SIL, the strategic industrial location, which is Park Royal. I'm right, you're thinking of relocating. And I noticed in your your land demand study of February 16, it was reported that you have a minuscule vacancy rate now in land and premises. And here you are relocating into the strategic industrial location, which is very strongly protected, but you're also at the same time reducing it. Now, how are you going to actually not just protect, but strengthen the amount of industry and move on space and start-up space in Park Royal if you're reducing it and you're bringing more into it and you have no vacancy rate?
Right.
Do you think this is wise to reduce the amount of land you've got there?
Hang on. Let's do sort of one bit of that at a time, and I'll just talk principle, and then I'm going to hand over to Victoria. As we have a target for creating jobs, which is an awful lot of them in the Old Oak bit, and also further jobs in Park Royal. So we are not going to be wanting to reduce the strategic industrial land, industrial locations. It is my view that one of the reasons that Park Royal was included in OPDC was so that we could protect the strategic industrial land, and that is exactly what we want to do. What we are very interested to explore, and this is something that we'll be doing with our Park Royal strategy, is potential intensification of business use. And we do have we've had a whole very learned report done on this, looking at the inefficiencies of the way land is actually used in Park Royal. And I think you'd be wanting to do this almost irrespective of us, because the demand for industrial land in that location is huge, as you rightly say. There are no vacancies. So actually looking at ways in which you can bring more businesses into there is really, really important. So, as I say, lots of work in progress on that. In terms of the industrial sites that exist on the Old Oak part of our patch, then obviously some are going to be changed. I mean, Car Giant is an industrial land site. That is now going to be zoned for housing. But we also have within our local plan substantial provision for employment space, industrial space, and Victoria can talk to the detail of that. So I hear everything you say about pressure on industrial land, and notwithstanding the fact that we're trying to make a massive contribution to the Mayor's housing targets, that cannot be at the expense of employment land and industrial land. We've got to provide adequately for that, and we've got to protect the employment status of the land that's there.
Thank you.
So, I mean, just to add that you'll be aware, of course, that our local plan will have to go through a public inquiry. We'll have to prove all of that to a planning inspector, which we'll be well prepared to do. And SEGRO are one of the major landowners in Park Royal. They're already trialling intensification in a number of parts of London. We're really keen to see what's going on in Meridian Waters up in Enfield. We think we can build on that. Whilst the vacancy rate is possibly the lowest of any industrial park in Europe, certainly in the UK, and the highest rental rates, these success factors should not choke Park Royal. When you walk around it, and I know you're familiar with the site, it's actually very low density, it's single story. This isn't how other countries plan industrial, they're decking up. There's an opportunity here, if it's done right, to intensify, and that's how we want to plan for that going forward. But it will require innovation.
Assembly Member Devonish, you have a question about the Article 4 consultation that was made reference?
I just wanted to ask that you write formally on what was said last night in terms of the Article 4 decision, please, and also your response to Nikki's point on PD at the end of the month.
Thank definitely. I'm interested in pursuing that one.
And if you send it to the Secretariat, then that
We will do.
can then be distributed. Thank you. Assembly Member Dr. Sahota.
Right. I expected my colleague to go first, but anyway. Can you provide me an update into the work being done to refine the results of the Development Infrastructure Fund, which you referred to in your meeting in March of this year? So can you update us what work's been done on that?
Would you like to do that? Yes, of course. So that earlier Development Infrastructure Fund, the DIF work, that has been lifted up, if you like, and then absorbed within the master planning work. So that was very early infrastructure work that came up with some very high-level assumptions as to how you could deliver the 25,500 homes, 65,000 jobs. ACOM have now taken that work and gone into a much higher level of granularity within the master plan to refine that into what we are working on as a clear delivery strategy. So a lot of progress has been made on it, and we will be updating the board on that next week as the emerging strategy for the master plan continues to evolve.
Victoria, the 2016 plan identifies Central Middlesex and Hammersmith hospitals within the area and stated the scale of development planned in the OPCD area provides opportunities for these facilities and others across London to expand to further medical science, and also to strengthen London's position as one of the world's leading medical centres of excellence. However, the health offer further to the ACOM review, which is now made part of the July 2017 draft, is primarily focused upon primary care. Why has the OPC dropped the ambitions for the hospitals in West London, particularly of Central Middlesex and of Hammersmith?
So if I can just be clear where we've got to at a very strategic level in our discussions, which have been led predominantly by our health specialist on this. We wanted to understand where the health authorities were planning additional capacity anyway. Then we had a very open and honest conversation with them about the population growth that could come with this new development, to listen where they would like to see expansion of services. And Middlesex Hospital, we see, as very much part of the future strategy. Indeed, as you've alluded to, there's capacity there to expand and intensify. And we've taken that one stage further. We think that there is an opportunity for Middlesex Hospital to be part of a new town centre within Park Royal, putting the heart into Park Royal, because as you'll be familiar, it's a bit sort of disaggregated. And there is an opportunity there, working with other major landowners, Asda and others, to really get a sense of community, a town centre. So I think things have moved on a bit from the description that you've just offered, because the local health authorities are very clear to us that they want to see capacity enhanced within Middlesex Hospital and Hammersmith Hospital, as well as an additional facility somewhere within the hub of the development. So in the early years, any Section 106 monies and enhancement to services, we're going to be focusing those around those existing facilities. So Middlesex Hospital is absolutely important, really important.
Reading the plan, what you really wanted to do is to build up a new primary care facility. That's what you talk about, putting a new facility on the Car Yarn site. But you're not talking about the hospital, and you talk about the health authority. Have you spoken to the boroughs of Hammersmith, Fulham and Ealing?
Absolutely, we've presented.
And what's their position on this matter?
Absolutely, we present to their health boards, and it's the first time I'm aware that any development corporation major regeneration schemes convened all of the health players around the table at the same time so that we can all be on the same page. You are right, there is, because of the dense, the high housing numbers we're talking, of course we'll need an additional new facility within the site, but we also need to intensify and enhance the existing facilities. That's where the health authorities and boroughs have told us that they would like the enhancements to be made. And Middlesex is, as you rightly alluded, it's at the cutting edge of many new technologies. Indeed, it was the first hospital to trial major surgery without a general anaesthetic. That was reported just this summer. So we're very excited about how Middlesex Hospital can play an important part in the regeneration of Old Oakham Park Royal.
Do you think that the OPDC has any responsibility for making independent assessment of what the health needs are in the area, or do you rely entirely upon the clinical commissioning groups?
So what I'd like to say to that is that the Mayor has commissioned, I can't remember the name of the body, you'll have to excuse me, and I'm happy to mop this up in the letter back to the Assembly members. He's commissioned a review of what you're talking about, the
it's called the King's Fund.
Yes, the King's Fund, thank you. They are looking at the assumptions that were made, and we are we're going to wait to see what that review says. I think that's the right thing to do.
And I hope whatever the findings of the King's Fund that you'll take on board, please.
Yes, I mean, this is the Mayor has commissioned the King's Fund to look at the assumptions, and we will take on board the findings of that. Until then, we have to wait.
Well, thank you very much.
Assembly Member Twycross.
Thank you. I was pleased to hear about the work you've commissioned on intensification, because I think the point that my colleague Nikki Gavril made about employment and industrial land.
We've already done a report, so if you want to read it, I mean, it is quite a good read, actually.
Yeah, I was just going to follow up and say, has your future commissioning of work included further detail on specifically the employment and skills profile for future industry at Park Royal, rather than just around the intensification? Is that already included in the report you've already carried out?
Yes, so we've undertaken an extensive evidence base for local plan, and those reports are all publicly available on the evidence base, and of course takes into account future growth sectors. And one of the future growth sectors we're very keen on, it's a shame Mickey Gavron's just stepped out, is the clean tech.
Yeah.
And we've been discussing that with the Deputy Mayor for Environment, for example. So yes, we have been looking at that.
That's very interesting, thank you. As you'll be aware, 30% of London's food passes through Park Royal, which makes it a true cluster for this industry. It's quite exciting, and I think it's something that not everybody would necessarily be aware of. How are you engaging with the food industry based here with the view of protecting, enhancing and strengthening employment opportunities within this sector in London?
Well, we're not just engaging with, I'm very conscious of the significance of the food industry on Park Royal, but we're keen to engage with Park Royal as a whole and all the industry there. We have one of the two chairmen of the Park Royal Business Group actually sits on the OPDC board, and what I'm quite keen to do is we're just thinking our way around how we'll do this. I want to sort of slightly enhance our sort of stakeholder engagement with the people at Park Royal. I mean, one of the problems with engaging with small business communities is the small businesses don't have time to do it. They're too busy actually running their small businesses, so getting them to come along and talk strategy and tactics and development and what we can do to help them. We have Rahul sitting on our board, which is great, but I want to sort of next layer down below him so that we can interact with all the different interested parties on Park Royal. So that's a bit of work in progress, looking at how we can do that. I'm in touch with Seagrow. I'm sort of rather hoping that even though they're a big landowner there, they might be prepared to, what they have said, they will work with us to support an enhancement of the sort of it's the right word I'm looking for, a sort of community consultation group there, getting the businesses round the table. Okay. So work in progress, but absolutely essential, food and all the others there as well.
Thank you. And I wonder whether you have or will be establishing targets for female BAME, the disabled and other key groups in direct and contracted employment over the lifespan of the development.
In terms of
diversity, in terms of ensuring that job opportunity and employment opportunities.
in the
Yeah.
job opportunities. Well, actually, I have no idea how far one could specify that in terms of, you know, I mean, it's an objective that we all sign up to.
Yes.
How do we do that?
Well, I mean, the
If we
big
can.
the big employment contracts will be let by the infrastructure deliverers, so HS2, for example, and the house builders. So how we do that is because we'll be letting some contracts, but not big numbers in jobs. So we'll do that. We can do it through planning, through Section 106 for the house builders, developers, and through HS2 we do it through our own influencing of what they're doing. Now they're in a fortunate position. They've taken on board a lot of the Elizabeth line approach to that. And HS2 take it very seriously, so we'll be holding them to account on that. But ourselves as an organisation, we take on board, we effectively adopt all of the Mayor's targets and we report on those. We're part of the annual equalities reporting and any specific initiatives that he has associated with that, whether it be gender equality, pay, etc. We're as the GLA family, part of the GLA family, we form part of that process.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. Assembly Member Boff.
Developers and designers and landowners effectively will get away with what they can in terms of developments. Is there not some advantage in advance of developments being submitted for planning approval of saying what the parameters of such a development are going to be?
Yes, I totally agree with you. And ironically, I think good developers actually prefer to know what they're going to have to deal with before they start anyway. Something I've spent the last 15 years sort of discussing in my previous role. Now, admittedly, the people who joined the British Property Federation were the respectable end of the development community and would have that sort of negotiation. But yes, I absolutely agree with you. That's why you need a well-specified, strong local plan, and you make it absolutely clear up front what it is you are looking for, and you do not let them get away with murder. Another reason why I want to supplement the board with people who can help ensure that we don't do that. Victoria?
And I would just add to that, in addition to the local plan, we often sign pre-application agreements with many of our major applicants to make it clear what parameters we're working on with them. So we're not messing around, they're not wasting our time and we're not wasting theirs.
So taking into account what you said yesterday about the density of developments, would it not be a good idea for you to say that it will not be tolerable for any families to be forced into any tower blocks on the Old Oak Park Royal site?
Well, I think I'm right in saying, I mean, the allocation of, you know, if we're talking about social housing, the allocation is the responsibility of the local authorities working with the RSLs, and I don't set that. I don't set that policy. We would be specifying what sort of mix
I understand
of housing.
that, Ms. Peace, but if there's no tower block built, you don't get faced with that dilemma.
I would actually, and this is something where the chair of our planning committee would also be a good person for you to talk to about this. I don't necessarily think tower blocks are not bad. It's when they're badly managed that they become a problem. Now, there are issues about what is suitable for a family with lots of young children and all the young tower blocks. You know, I'm not an expert on social housing policy, but it's all about, if you're going to build tower blocks, you need them properly managed.
Perhaps you could provide me with some examples of where some mixed tenure tower blocks have been successful for families.
Yeah, I will look at that. I don't know what the policy of the three boroughs is in terms of allocating families with children to tower blocks.
It's not the allocations I'm concerned about.
Yeah, I know, but I don't know whether there are people in tower blocks in that area. We don't have any tower blocks on our site, so it's not part of my...
As you've said, it's down to management.
Yeah.
You will not be responsible for that management. So perhaps we should just have a planning conditions that say we're not going to build the tower blocks. Wouldn't that be an easier solution?
No, I don't think it would be a very good solution because I think that would close off options for achieving a good mix of types of residential. There may be places, as our master planning develops, where tower blocks are absolutely fine, and they're fine for a particular demographic who happens to want and like living in them.
So by welcoming tower blocks, you'll be happy for planning applications to come forward for residential tower blocks, to be honest?
We're not ruling anything in and we're not ruling anything out. And I certainly wouldn't want to say I do not want to receive planning applications for tower blocks. I mean, the consents that we have given over the space of the last 6 months, I think the tallest is 22. I think the tallest tower block on the master plan that Car Giant have done so far are about 40. Now, that's still pie in the sky. That's not come anywhere near our planning committee yet. Sorry?
Literally in the sky.
Well, yes, I suppose you're right. But I just don't think we would want to rule out a well-designed tower block. And again, it might be for private occupancy or it might be RSL managed. There are all manner of different options. Why would we want to constrain development that, as long as it's well done?
Because if we go back to my original comment, which you seem to agree with, is if you don't draw the parameters, developers will submit what they can get away with. But you stated very clearly what you believe. I'm saddened by that, may I say?
Well, I'm sorry, but I just don't think ruling out some tower blocks, as long as they're well designed, would be a sensible thing to do.
I look forward to the challenge, you taking up the challenge of providing me with an example of a mixed tenure tower block that effectively works in London. It was a challenge that I gave to the LLDC on the Olympic Park.
I will very happily take on
failed on that challenge as well.
And what do you mean? What do you mean by a tower block? How tall do you mean?
Any family living above the 4th floor is, as far as I'm concerned, just out of the question. In a modern world, it's out of the question. Any family with children being expected to be brought up in that environment is out of the question.
You may be absolutely right, and the answer may be that you don't, if you are the housing authority or the RSL, you don't put people above the 4th floor. But that's not my job.
I beg your pardon. Sorry.
Okay, thanks for that, Assembly Member Buff. Let's no others wanting to come in on that question. Okay, let's move on to the question in the name of Assembly Member Curtin. Affordable homes. Can you guarantee that 50% of homes built on the OPDC site will be genuinely affordable?
Right.
Got you down.
Yes. Okay, I'm so sorry, I'm getting confused. Right. Well, I've sort of half answered that, so I'll go back to the fact that we're a mayoral development corporation. We have to deliver the mayor's housing policy. All our planning applications are scrutinised by the Deputy Mayor for Housing, and so far we have accorded with the mayoral policy, I think, on all of them. The issue seems to be, and I think I've got this right, it gets very, very technical, the Mayor is already specifying 50% affordable on public sector land, and he's specifying 35% affordable on private land with an objective to raise that to 50% over a period. And we obviously will start off on the assumption that we can comply with that. Now, the only rider I would put on that is that if you are expecting or hoping to extract as much as possible from the developer in terms of contribution, be it in the form of affordable housing or other things, then if you decided that to get that development away there was a very, very big infrastructure requirement, we might have to have a negotiation around that. But we would have to take that to the Deputy Mayor for Housing, because we would, if there was any attempt to depart from the Mayor's housing policy.
So are you saying here it's not really your decision, it's the decision of the Deputy Mayor for Housing?
Well, ultimately, I see it as my role to deliver the Mayor's policy. If I go to the Mayor and say I can't do it for whatever reason, then he would either allow me to deviate from it or say not good enough, go back and try again.
Right,
And
so there isn't,
that seems to be a fair situation.
it's more of an aspiration rather than a guarantee then that you're going to have 35% on public land, you said, and
I mean,
50% on private land.
I don't think anything in life is guaranteed, but if you take, if you look at the other case studies, which I think you will do very actively in Transport for London, and look at how they're approaching it, then that's clearly that's clearly our starting point. And as Liz has very eloquently put, is having an open and honest, transparent conversation about some of the challenges on these sites. Now, we're not starting with a legacy of infrastructure investment that the Legacy Corporation had, for example. So it's a big challenge. So what we are doing to address that, when this is relevant to your question, is to look at the additional sources of infrastructure funding that can help boost up the infrastructure component so that you don't lose affordable housing. So, for example, the government's Housing Infrastructure Fund is of most interest to us, because if we can access a large chunk of infrastructure funding to get some of the early sites away, that means, without getting too technical, when you're having a very transparent viability conversation with the applicant and they say they can't deliver X because they've got to put Y in, if we can help with the Y, then we can have more of the X, which is the affordable housing. So that's just one of the funds that we're looking at, and it's very much part of this delivery plan.
But I mean, my aspiration would always be to deliver what the Mayor wants, and more in terms of affordable housing if we can. I mean, I think it's absolutely vital that we get the right mix of different tenures and different levels here. We are not building apartments and homes just for wealthy people. This has got to be the right mix.
What's your definition of affordable here, and my question was about genuinely affordable.
Well, yes, I did. When we were looking at your questions, I'm afraid I underlined that point, because I think this is a very fraught question at the moment. I mean, genuinely affordable to whom as well, you would have to say. Obviously, there are a lot of people out there who need what I would call, in the old terms, social rent, which I always get these muddled up. That's the London affordable rent, isn't it? But in my housing association time, we looked at that as social rent, 40% of market renting. You would be very lucky to get a development where all the affordable was going to be 40% of social rent. I'm not saying it can't be done. You know, there may be different mechanisms one can explore. I mean, this is why actually the Mayor's definition of affordable housing is a relatively broad one, and includes his London living rent, the intermediate rent, and indeed shared ownership. And you know, those are the sort of affordable housing targets the RSLs have been working towards as well. So yes, in an ideal world, you'd like to maximise the contribution at the social rent level, but that may not turn out to be feasible, and at the moment the Mayor's policy does not require that. I mean, he sets out 30% of the so if you get either 35 or 50% of your development will be affordable housing, then 30% of that has to be at London affordable rent, which is my old social rent. I think that's got that right, haven't I? Yes. Yeah.
So it may just be sort of 10.5% being. I
think that's how it works. Yes.
Genuinely affordable.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Do you think that your site will deliver that?
Well, my aspiration would be to do that, subject to, it's back to what Victoria says, what one can never absolutely guarantee because of all the other things that we've got to pay for. And if we can get some of those other things paid for by other means, then we can be a lot tougher on delivering that. I would like to. That would be my starting point. But I am actually a pragmatist, and I want to get homes delivered for the Mayor.
All right. Thank you. That's fine. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Then let's go to the next question. Oh, sorry. Assemblymember Copley.
I'm going to have another go. Thank you, Jeanette. Although quite a bit of my question was covered. You said that you'll be in line, obviously, with the Mayor's policies. Presumably that means, I mean, and you touched upon the fact that there would have to be negotiations if there's a rise in infrastructure costs, for example, and that therefore may result in a lower level of affordable housing than what's in the Mayor's, the targets in the, or the benchmarks in the Mayor's SPG, in which case there would presumably need to be a viability process. In line with what the Mayor says in the SPG, those viability assessments, I assume you'll be making public, is that correct?
Is that the policy?
Well, I understand as of yesterday that is the policy. The specifics of the policy, of course, we will be adhering to because we are a mayoral development corporation. If the mayor has said he wants all viability assessments to be publicly available, then I can see no reason why we would make ours unavailable.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. And we've talked before about the potential for capturing some of the land value uplift on the private parts, private land within the OPDC. Have you had any discussions regarding progressing, potentially getting some form of land value capture mechanism?
Oh gosh, land value capture, how long have we got? I know it's a subject.
We've got about 2 minutes.
Damn, I wanted to debate with you the merits of Henry George and everything else. To be honest, I think the whole issue of trying to devise a completely new method of land value capture for us to implement in Old Oak is a bit beyond what we are capable of doing. I mean, I happen to think it's a debate that needs to be had more widely, either at GLA level or indeed at national level. What we're going to try and do immediately is to use the mechanisms that are available to us. We have our SIL proposals. I can't remember what stage they've reached, Victoria. Have we published them?
We haven't because there's, well, we published the proposals, but there's this ongoing debate at the national level, of course, isn't there?
Of course, yes, absolutely. So we have some outline SIL proposals. I've been through those with the team, looking at how we can use that to best advantage. We will obviously be maxing out as far as we can on the Section 106. You know, and those are the principal mechanisms available to us. You're probably aware also, of course, that the Secretary of State for Transport has been very keen that HS2 should look at new methodologies for getting some form of value capture of the enhanced value that arises from the stations and the infrastructure. So I'm watching that with great interest as well.
There's the development rights auction model, which TfL has been sort of offered as a pilot, but I mean, I'm aware that may not necessarily be the best option.
Well, if you can understand that, perhaps you'd like to come and explain it to me, because I've read it several times and I really don't quite see how that works.
I have a little summary here and I'm still getting my head around it
well,
as well.
I would welcome your summary, yes.
But
look, I have spent the last 15 years grappling with the issue of land value capture, wearing a lot of different hats. I think it's a really important one. And I don't know how to crack it, and nobody has cracked it either since Henry George in 1879. So it is an issue that I would like to pursue, but I think we have to sort of work within, again, the constraints of what's realistic at the moment. But perhaps we might have a separate discussion around land value capture.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd enjoy that.
Thank you. Let's move then to the next question. The heading is Land Assembly. It's in the name of Assembly Member Bailey, and the question is, when will the OPDC own sufficient land resources to deliver 25k homes?
Oh, there you are. So sorry. Thank you. I can't read the signs from the labels from here. Well, the answer is we may not have to. And I don't actually believe that land ownership is always going to be necessary to actually deliver the 25,000 homes. So let me elaborate on that. I mean, our two principal landowners are Network Rail and Car Giant. Well, Network Rail stroke HS2 with the construction sites. Now, it may well be that with Network Rail, and once we have developed with them the implementation of the MOU, there is a much easier way to do this rather than tying up GLA stroke OPDC capital in actually handing over cash for a site, because if you work out the terms on which you're going to develop it jointly and then share the proceeds downstream, taking account of the original purchase price, saves you having to find the capital up front. So that may, and I'm not saying it will, but that may be one way of doing it. So the important thing is to get an agreement with the landowner as to how that will be managed. Private sector is slightly different. You know, our biggest private sector owner is Car Giant. At the moment, Car Giant have made it absolutely clear that they want to develop homes on their site and that they are prepared to move to an alternative site so that that can actually be done. So again, one may not need, and I do stress may, one may not need to own the site in order to actually achieve the housing numbers we've promised and we are required to deliver.
And this strategy will also be relevant to the job creation, because you have quite a large job creation target here, which will mean developing non-industrial sites, etc. Will that same set of tactics work?
Absolutely. And I mean, if if there is a piece of Network Rail land that is capable of mixed-use development, then, again, we would have the discussion with Network Rail about, whether it makes sense for us to own it and drive the development ourselves, whether we do it as a joint venture, whether between us we agree to bring in a third party who could actually develop the land, do the building, and then, in the tally of the numbers as you go through in the development agreement, money gets paid to Network Rail for their existing use value, and we look at potential sharing of the profits. I'm not ruling out land ownership. I mean, and I think there are some cases where it would be sensible because we would have more control. I'm just saying it's not the absolute be-all and end-all to get what we want.
So you earlier on you talked about how many homes you have in the pipeline. So apparently you have 1,016, if I'm right, homes that have been given planning permission.
Yes, that's
What
right.
proportion of those are affordable under the Mayor's definition?
If you just bear with me a moment, I carefully wrote this down, knowing that this issue would come up, and I'm just looking for my summary of it. Well, perhaps you would chip in. Thank you. Have you got the affordable? Right.
Yes, I have got the affordable. I mean, it's overall there's about 2,500 homes that have been consented, and some of those, because of the way we've set up the corporation, are consented by Ealing, and they've been negotiating the specific affordability aspects. For the specific schemes, which, as Liz alluded to earlier, is 1,016 homes that we have consented. Of those, total affordable units is just under 400. So we're talking about sort of.
Where's
my chief finance officer when I need him? No,
I'm sure it's 30%.
It's a significant proportion. It's a significant proportion, rightly so. We hope to increase the proportion, as is the case with early schemes, getting going. It's it's a very early stage, but as we move along, we would expect to see that proportion increase significantly.
Okay, just to slightly change tack, we'll talk about your memorandum of understanding with the Department of Transport over the land. You talked earlier on that it's a fairly good deal, you can work with it, and that you wanted to cement it. What does that mean, and is there any timeline, and does it stop you moving forward with any of your plans to develop the site?
Well, let me deal with the latter one first. I don't think the agreement... no, I don't think there's anything that needs stop us. Provided we actually sit down, and this is one of my targets for the next 6 months, sit down with Network Rail and the Department for Transport and actually work out a more detailed sort of implementation of that MOU, because the MOU is in very broad terms. It doesn't talk about specific sites, does it?
It does.
It mentions one or two, but it hasn't got a map, it hasn't got values, it hasn't, this sort of thing. So that actually, as I said, is one of my targets for the next 6 months. I've opened discussions. I've met Sir Peter Hendy. I've met Network Rail's land and property director. They know what we're interested in doing, and we'll be moving that forward as quickly as possible.
I think I would just add that it's not a legally binding document, but it is a statement of intent, if you like. So it's an MOU that was set out under previous administration with a previous Secretary of State for Transport, and what has been said today is it's about very closely looking at that and firming it up in whatever way is the appropriate way to do that. And that may require some amendments to it. We very much see it as a live document.
Is Homes for London involved in this conversation that's been led by OPDC?
Not at the moment, but I will certainly be keeping them totally in the picture if they want to join in and help us. I mean, I think at the moment my main tack is with Department for Transport and Network Rail together. But Homes for London are aware of what we're doing. and know that, you know, this is where we want to go, and they will join in as appropriate and as we need them.
We earlier on touched on the ogre of capturing land values and how that works. But is the GLA moving fast enough to help you do that? Is there something else that could be done? You know, is there a methodology that needs to be worked out? Is there support that people can be given? Where are we on that? Because it seems like an important component of what we're trying to achieve here.
Well, I mean, I think any fundamental change to the tax system, and coming back to Assembly Member Copley's point, you know, is a central government one. And I very much doubt if central government is going to crack this problem in a timescale that's going to be massively helpful to us. I think actually in terms of negotiating things like SIL and Section 106, the fact that we have got the GLA behind us and the Mayor's policy behind us is exceedingly helpful. Because in some ways, when you're sitting there in front, or our team are sitting there in front of a developer and they want to play hardball, sorry, that's the Mayor's policy. This is what we've got to deliver. And I'm sure the team are perfectly capable of doing that.
Yes, and what I would just add to that is London Finance Commission Mark II, as I understand it. What I've said to Professor Travers is, if there's something you want to try, have a conversation with us, because there's the opportunity here under the Mayor's control, because it's the Mayoral Development Corporation, to try out something new and it is a big if you're successful in your conversations with Treasury.
I'm afraid it always comes back to Treasury.
Whether it's stamp duty, as was in the press yesterday, or whether it's land value tax, or whether it's the drum or the dram, whatever that thing that Tom Copley was alluding to. There are all these ideas, and I think our starting point is, well, we're here to have a conversation about any of those when they've been finessed to a point where we can actually get something trialled.
I think it was touched, thank you for that. I think it was touched upon earlier about funding going forward. What funding do you see that you'll need that you don't have a clear idea of how you're going to get that funding?
Well, the main funding requirement is going to be around the big pieces of infrastructure. And it comes back to the fact that this is, despite all this amazing public transport, it's actually a sort of island surrounded by railway lines and a couple of roads on east and west. So this delivery plan that we're working on is going to be focusing on the key bits of infrastructure. I think the first sort of major ones will be effectively either for bridges or underpasses, you know, ways in which you can actually get in and out of the site at north, south, east and west. And until you actually get those sorted, it's very difficult to actually have a very substantial development of at the core of the site. So that will be on the first part of our wish list, coupled with energy, the utilities, energy, waste, water. And where we are hoping to sort of be able to get more development going early on towards the western side of the site, you know, it's going to be absolutely essential that you can bring in the utilities. We do not have enough at the moment. Our head of infrastructure has been focusing very much on how you achieve that sort of utility supply. So it's transport, utilities and
social infrastructure. But we see that developers paying for a lot of that. And I think a useful case study is Ebbsfleet, where they are now forward funding infrastructure that they know they will get funding back from developers, but they've got upfront assistance from the government to, they've just led a big contract for their energy centre, several tens of millions of pounds for it. And that's exactly the sort of approach that gets big development away. It's not rocket science. It's what every major regeneration scheme faces, is how do you forward fund infrastructure that gets development going? And that's what our delivery plan is looking at.
Because as someone who's lived on either side, in fact I've lived on 3 sides of the site, I know it's an island, and there is no infrastructure there. And there's a tension between the Mayor's target to deliver houses and the cost of delivering infrastructure, because effectively you're going to have to deliver infrastructure for Halsden on one side, for sort of Acton down the other end. Is there a tension there? Have you resolved how you will meet the Mayor's requirement, which is quite tough, but also meet this infrastructure requirement, which actually is very, very tough. And the success of this whole thing, for me, hinges on the infrastructure you provide to the residents who are already there, let alone the ones who will be coming.
Well, first of all, I absolutely agree with that assessment. It is absolutely vital that we get that part right. But come back to what I said earlier. Having done this, or in the process of preparing this delivery plan, which is actually going to focus on the prioritised list of the items that we need to unlock the various parts of the site, so that we actually have a realistic assessment, not some massive sort of number that will scare the horses and frighten the Treasury away. And then it's going to be about looking at the best way of getting that. We've had something of a sort of boost to morale in the announcement of the Housing Infrastructure Fund, and we're currently discussing with the GLA, because applications to that have to be made through the GLA. We can't do them directly, but we're discussing with the GLA how far our scheme, can be put forward as part of that. So we would hope to be looking for some contribution for that. And if, well, I'm keeping my fingers crossed that goes well, but there are other pots of government funding, and there have to be ultimately a direct approach to the Mayor and or the Treasury, because I mean there are ways and ways of doing it through the GLA, or you go direct to central government. So we've got a mix of possibilities, and we've got all of them. It's like all plates spinning in the air.
The mix sounds great. Having a number of options is obviously a good thing,
yeah.
But most of those options point at the government, and at some point they may start to ask, why should London get all this extra money?
Well,
we're probably going to have to ask the Mayor to put his hand in his pocket, because this is a significant development. I just wonder, is there a plan B if the government doesn't roll in and help? And could you be stuck, because you work for the Mayor, but you will be stuck potentially telling him that he can't have as much housing as he wants, because the whole development will fail if we can't deliver the infrastructure. It'll make your silk negotiations a bit tougher. Are you prepared to do that? Is the Mayor's office letting you know they'll support you in that, or are they going to make it hard for you?
Ask me in 6 months' time when I've presented my delivery plan to him.
Fair enough. I suppose I'm asking you something that you're going to have to experience.
But I mean, you've outlined it incredibly well. That's exactly how it is. We have a plan. The plan B could be quite difficult. If you're actually saying to the Mayor, well, sorry, we've failed in, I hope we don't get to this position, but we've failed in tapping into all these sources of central government money. If we want this to happen now, what can the GLA do for us? We're not there yet. I hope we never get to that. But yes, you're quite right. That's a possible scenario in 12 months' time. I hope it isn't.
Me too. I would like to suggest that all of my colleagues would help you with that conversation.
Thank you very
we
much.
desperately want this to work, but I could be putting words into people's mouths. So my last point I want to come to, in a world of magic wands, what additional powers would you want from central government? If I could grant you a wish and you could just roll in and say, DF, I want this, I'd like that. What is it that you would want? What additional power?
That's not fair. I hate questions like that. What would we ask for, Victoria? You have a first go while I think about it.
I've got a shopping list. One of the things I would ask for is more commissioning power over the HS2 station. At the moment, although we're the planning authority and will grant some of the very minor consents, we have no power on influencing, other than through personal relationships, influencing what goes into the tender for what will be the largest subsurface station to have ever been built in the UK.
The natural question to that is why? What would benefit the local residents if you had that additional power?
Put very simply, we want to have the best possible access, and I'm talking about bridges and connections in and out. And the way the station is being designed isn't always with putting the local residents absolutely at the fore. It's about making the station work and the connections within. So if we were able to have some direct power on that, I think we would, working hand in hand with HS2, and I should say we do work very well with them, but we have no power over them. So if I had something on my Christmas list, it would be to have some direct commissioning power on influence on that station design.
Okay,
that would be one of the things. But
and I think mine would probably be I'd like some sort of almost like fairy dust to help TfL come to what I know for them are incredibly difficult decisions about different elements of their their future transport plans, but part of the sort of challenge with OPDC is there are just so many different moving parts, and you can't do something until TfL has been able to do something else, and TfL can't do it. Now, TfL have got massive challenges, and we've established a very, very good dialogue with them, and I think in some ways I would like the fairy dust for them so that they can resolve some of their sort of big transport issues for the future, so that helps us move forward more quickly.
Okay, and my final question. Earlier on, in the course of discussion, you talked about there being shovels in the ground in 1718. Is that correct?
Yes, I mentioned that in theory, James Murray and I are going to wield one of them on the 29th of September.
So very, very soon?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Devonish.
Good morning. This is, of course, the biggest regen project in Western Europe. And to quote somebody you know in the property industry, you're trying to build a spacecraft with the budget that my residents, some of them spend that on their children's wedding. Was one that I had recently. You're trying to do three things, Liz. I'm trying to step back and... Number one, you're trying to build tens of thousands of homes and mixed developments within the 6 years that perhaps the man you report to is particularly focused on. So the industry and government take the whole project seriously. Point two, you're trying to find people with deeper pockets and balance sheets than Her Majesty's Treasury are going to give anybody at the moment under any government. And my question really is, how are you going to simplify the wonderful public-private relationships that you know better than most, Liz, and the OJU process, the development process, to make sure that those that have those deep pockets are going to want to work with you rather than all the other wonderful projects, not just in this country, but globally?
Gosh, I think it comes back to some of what I was saying earlier in response to sort of what do you really need to get this site going. You need to have a very, very clear plan. You need to be able to show you have political support. We need to have support for some of the infrastructure, because even where some of these, particularly the overseas sort of investors come in, they still want to see a government contribution. I mean, if you look at Battersea, look at Battersea Power Station and the investment there, it was a partnership in the end. The Malaysian investors are putting a lot of money in, but they also expected to see a contribution in the form of the Northern Line extension from government. So it's very much sort of having the right sort of plan that's got the right sort of support, that you can show the wider world that you are serious, and that ultimately people who come in can actually make some money from it, because they won't do it if they can't. But it is a certain sort of capital that we would be looking for. It's going to be the longer-term patient capital for some elements of the site. I mean, you could actually, and to some extent our local plan does this, you know, there is so much you could do with this site. You know, if you took, for example, the Willesden Junction element, if you could somehow or other combine the redevelopment of a station at Willesden Junction with some of the northern bit of our site, you know, with access over the railway lines, with potential for development over and around the station, you might have there a package which would appeal to an overseas investor who is prepared to come into it for the long term. So it comes back to having this plan and having the commitment and having the support.
And how can you talked a lot about the interface issue, which is, of course, the biggest challenge for this project in your career? How can you hive off some of those interfaces and make, dare I say it, a bit more simple than the TfL property panel is at the moment to work with?
Oh, yes. Well, that's a good question. I mean, it all depends what sort of plan and packages we can put together. I mean, I accept that OJU is always going to be a challenge. I have recently done some work for the Mayor on the Homes for Londoners board, getting a group of developers around the table to looking at how we can sort of devise new delivery models. And the first thing they all wanted to talk about was OJU. What can we do about OJU? Well, I've spent a long time with central government trying to persuade them to simplify that. So I can't answer it specifically, Tony, but you know, there are ways in which we can use the expertise we've got in-house, we can use the GLA expertise, we can use the people who are working for ACOM and Deloitte Real Estate to help us put together packages which will appeal to people out there who actually want to invest and do development.
And if I can just add, one of the questions, the number one sort of disincentive that we get from investors, I mean, there are many, but and there are lots of investors, as you can imagine, who come and visit, and with deep pockets, but they want to do things quickly and they get frustrated. But they ask about planning, and because the corporation has the planning power as well as the master planning, this is incredibly attractive because it removes one of the major risks in their mind, rightly or wrongly, that there's planning control as well as the master planning aspect.
Although I wouldn't like you to think that we're going to be a soft touch on planning. That does not mean we would be, but we do actually have a very effective planning team, and I think a very effective planning committee.
Yes, who, you know, we
but they're tough.
But yeah, everything is mayoral policy. It is what it is. But we're different to your average local authority because we don't do any of the other local authority stuff. We just do planning and development. So we're there to get things going, and that reduces one of the risks for developers. But there are many others, and delay is one of them. So how you streamline it? Well, our advisors, as Liz has alluded to, are helping us to look at clever ways to do that. But we are a public authority, and we have public obligations to meet.
Well, I'm sure you'll achieve more than most. I'm confident of that. Can I make one final plea? And I think all Assembly members have made these pleas to James Murray and the team. You're talking, understandably, in your project of mainly the largest development partners going forward, the usual suspects. This is a huge site. Is there any part of the site that if you did take a small footprint and decontaminate it, you could hand it over to cooperatives, small builders, smaller housing associations, self-build, i.e. not the usual people in a state gazette? You don't have to answer that now. You can say you're going to look at it and come back to us.
I agree. I think we should be offering that. I mean, I've had my ear bent, and in fact, I think I mostly agree with them. You know, lots of people who want to do that sort of smaller scale development and actually making sites available for smaller developers. In fact, I think I'm right in saying, I mean, there was a recent a statement from, was it the Planning Minister, or the Housing and Planning Minister, quite recently, talking about the central government wish to see sites, some element of sites made available for different forms of development. And certainly I know some of the house builders are realising that they may have to allocate a certain part of their site or subsell a piece of their site so you can get smaller, more individual development. I'm quite interested in the role of community land trusts and what they might actually be able to achieve. We've got enough space at Old Oak. We ought to be able to experiment with some of these things.
And finally, can I just ask, you inferred at the beginning that you would be coming up with a date for how much housing you will be building by in the next 6 years. Can I push you when we're going to get the date when you're going to actually give us, or rather James Murray no doubt will give us some numbers, because we're always short on numbers in this administration.
This is part of the delivery plan that we're going to put together, and out of that we will have a prioritised plan for bringing certain sites forward, and out of that will drop a number. And I would certainly say we are aiming to have that in a form that we can share with people by late autumn. It's got to go to our board. We're having the first discussion about it at our board next week. We've had some informal discussions with the GLA. I've no doubt different bits of the GLA will want to crawl all over it with us, and we'll do that with them, and then get something that probably will then be finally ratified by both the Mayor and our board. I wouldn't like to put a specific date to it, but I would like it to be late autumn. That might be a government definition of late autumn, which usually runs to the 1st of January, but never mind.
And just to add that I made the commitment either at this meeting or a subcommittee that we would publish all of our permitted figures on our website, so that so that it's easy to find the total of consented schemes as well, so that you can track progress. I don't know if it's up there at the moment, but I'll take away to ensure that it gets up there as soon as possible if it's not already.
Thank you very much both.
Thank you. Well, that brings us to the end of this Q&A session. On behalf of the Assembly, may I thank the Chair and the Chief Executive of the OPDC for their attendance and for answering the Assembly's questions today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Can I now turn to the motion set out on the agenda in my name in relation to the Q&A session, namely to note the answers to the questions asked. Thank you. And I'll now hand over to the Deputy as I will be called upon.
Yes. Petition in the name of Assembly Member Arnold. Prayer of the petition is...
Thank you, Chair. I present a petition on behalf of 28 residents of Springfield Road, E4. The prayer reads, Network Rail have planned to replace the fencing between Springfield Road, E4 and Chingford Station. It has been suggested they would use either wire mesh fence or metal picket fence. This will materially increase the noise from the trains and significantly change the view from the street. We call upon TfL and Network Rail to hold a public meeting with residents to discuss proposals before any work commences, with a view to reducing the noise levels and appearance of the street, which will have a material effect on the quality of residents' lives.
Will the Assembly agree to forward the petition to the Mayor as Chairman of Transport for London for a response? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Item 6, motions. The 6.1 motion in the name of Assembly Member Berry.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chair. I want to thank Assembly Member Pigeon for seconding this motion. I think this is an issue which is about pure common sense, and it has quite a lot of cross-party consensus around it. It's a motion about the concept of privately owned public space. And actually most Londoners now are quite familiar with a lot of these. What they are is when a private developer creates or re-provides a public space as part of their development, they don't hand it over to the local authority to run as a public square or park as might have happened in the past. Instead, they manage it themselves. And there's nothing wrong with that. But when you go into one of these spaces, what you may or may not see is a sign saying that it's private property. You may or may not see a sign saying what the rules are for the taking part in activities in that space. We're all quite familiar with entrances to parks where you see a sign saying the park bylaws are dogs must be on a lead, or, you know, don't barbecue or do barbecue, you know, all of those different rules are set out there. When you go into one of these privately owned public spaces, you might not have a clue until you break the rules by doing something as simple as taking photographs, gathering into a group and singing, having a picnic, lying down, using a scooter or a skateboard. There's lots of different rules being applied to these spaces, and they're not transparent. You don't know until one of the security guards comes up and tells you that you've broken the rules, and your ability to get redress if you've been treated unfairly is very unclear as well. Some examples of this are Bishop Square in Spitalfields, Paternoster Square in the City of London, and the open spaces all around the ExCeL Centre. There's 4 major spaces in the King's Cross Railway Lands area in my borough of Camden. We're all quite familiar with the area around City Hall. Over the years, Assembly members have teased out what the rules are for the area around here, and still we've managed to work out that whenever we have to go outside into this area to do an interview, we have to take our special orange pass, which I think my predecessor, Jenny Jones, was responsible for creating. There was a slight mistake on my orange pass the last time they issued it to me, and the date had been the month had been crossed out, got wrong and put back in, and the security guards outside wouldn't accept it. They made me go back and get a new one because these rules are not brilliant. I think what we need is something. It's not about the outcomes, it's about the process, and that's what this motion asks for. There's an amendment to the motion that the Labour members have put down. I'm happy to accept this amendment. I don't quite agree with striking out the specific remedy that the original motion proposed, which was to ask the Mayor to put in a policy of making normal local authority bylaws apply to these spaces. But I think that the third paragraph of the motion, which says, we want the Mayor to be setting rules to govern these spaces through the lifetime of developments, not just at the application stage, does what I want from this motion anyway. The Guardian are based in King's Cross, which is where a lot of these areas are. And as journalists going out to do interviews and take photographs, they've fallen foul of the red-hatted security guards around there as well. And so they've taken an interest in it, and they have done an investigation. They wrote to the owners of the 50 biggest privately owned public spaces across London, and what they found was that all but 2 of the landowners refused to even answer their question about what the rules were on their spaces. So they published a very good article a few months ago, and in response to that, the Mayor has said some very good words. In fact, through a spokesperson, he said he will go as far as the law allows in his new London plan to ensure rules applying to such spaces are no more onerous than those that apply on publicly owned land. The motion quotes the Deputy Mayor for Planning, Regeneration and Skills, who has said that the new London plan would seek to maximise access and minimise restrictions, as well as enabling planners to establish potential restrictions at the application stage for new developments. I think we do need to be urging a process here, not just for the rules to be set at the planning application stage. We don't want to end up like the apocryphal rules that you have in America where you can't eat ice cream on a Sunday in London. We want a democratic, accountable process for new rules to be requested by developers if they want reasonable rules, and for the public to know what these are and potentially challenge them. So I think it's a good motion in its amended form. I will move it in its amended form and hope we can pass it. I think being able to know what rules you are governed by and how to challenge these rules is a fundamental part of living in a democracy. And I think that sort of almost by accident we've developed a little gap in this democracy and governing our public spaces, and it's growing as an issue across London. It affects a lot of our constituents' daily lives. So we're asking for a sensible and proportionate policy that the Mayor can bring in, and I hope everyone here will vote for this motion today. Thank you.
Okay, can I have Assembly Member Russell to second?
Pigeon.
Oh, sorry, I'm miles away. Assembly Member Pigeon to second the motion.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to second Assembly Member Berry's motion today, and she's obviously outlined in great detail many of the issues. London has seen this sort of growing creep on restrictions of activities being imposed by owners of public squares and other spaces that you couldn't really imagine. And as it's been highlighted, it's evident on our doorstep here at More London, but there are many, many other sites, over 50 as Assemblymember Berry has highlighted, across the capital that could be seen as sort of pseudo-public space. And these areas look open, openly attract people coming onto them, and they often have commercial activities on them that attract visitors into them, yet suddenly they can impose the management of these spaces draconian rules. Often these aren't signposted or communicated with the public. And the area that frustrates me hugely is this issue of the infringement in terms of the media and news reporting around City Hall. The idea, the home of London government, that you can't just be filmed as an elected politician outside without having a pass, which we all fought for so long. And can you imagine this happening on College Green, opposite Parliament? That every MP and peer would have to have a pass to be filmed on the space next to the Parliament. It's absolutely absurd, but it's what happens here. And I think these restrictions also are bad for the reputation of London as a great world city. I know that there are international broadcasters who come along and they've been shocked when they've been, I don't know, doing a documentary on cycling in London and having security guards literally descend on you when you're filming a piece of news. So this motion is really timely. It would be great to get as much support cross-party on this today. And I think it's absolutely right that as the Mayor is developing the London plan, it should go further and absolutely establish real transparency and accountability for setting these rules, not only at the application stage, but for the lifetime of these public spaces. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We have an amendment to this motion. Can I have Assembly Member Gavron to move the amendment?
It's been accepted. Yes, but I would like to speak to the amended motion.
No, sorry, I'm chairing this meeting, Assembly Member Berry, and I would like the amendment to be formally moved. Thank you. And it can then be formally accepted. Okay. Okay, Assembly Member Gavron, please
I'll
formally
move
move the amendment.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anyway, I'm grateful this motion's been brought to the attention of the Assembly, and not out of time too. It's very important. I think it's absolutely central to the quality of life of Londoners and, as has been pointed out, to London's reputation. I mean, these spaces, these open spaces in our public realm are where we come together, where we talk, walk, meet, eat, drink, trade. They're exactly where we come together to celebrate in the good times and in the bad times, to remember, to mourn, and also to stand firm against adversity. And yet, they're really threatened, as has been pointed out, because there's a creeping corporatisation of our public space and our public life, actually. So what happens is that the spaces now are developed by developers. They are designed and maintained by developers, and of course they then control the access, has been very well pointed out. Now I think, you know, I've got a lot of time for this idea of bylaws, but they'll be very, very protracted, they'll be challenged, they'll be done one at a time, and it's not going to achieve what we need to achieve right now. And what we need to do right now is to build on the recommendations of a report that the Planning Committee put forward in the last administration, called Public Life in Private Hands, which actually made a series of recommendations on what should be done in terms of being a strategic authority and in terms of local authorities. And I think if we take those and start from that point and put those forward, plus strengthening to the Deputy Mayor, we're in the right place. What we absolutely have to do is to make sure that at the pre-application stage, this is thrashed out, and there is a firm set of rules. There probably has to be an SPG on this. The Mayor has to produce a firm set of rules, and they can then be negotiated, agreed, and then they have to be monitored over the lifetime, as you've said, of the development. But I think that's the way forward. So on that basis, I'd like to move the amendment and accept the motion.
Okay, thank you. Can I call upon Assembly Member Copley to second the amendment?
Formally, Chair.
Thank you very much. Can I ask Assembly Member Berry if she accepts the amendment formally?
I do. Apologies for doing that earlier.
Can I now open the debate? And I've got Assembly Member Boff.
This is quite sad because we were heading for a motion that certainly we could have supported, but in an instant of accepting the Labour amendment, unfortunately, Assembly Member Berry rejected support from the GLA Conservatives. The original motion very strongly stated about that any such plans should any such negotiations should take place with local authorities. The Labour amendment removed that that autonomy of local, or power of local authorities from the motion, and unfortunately we cannot now support it, sympathetic as we are to the idea of the creeping opposing the creeping privatisation, if you like, of public spaces. That's not something you usually hear a Tory saying, but we do believe in the permeability of all new developments. We do believe that public spaces should be available to as many people as possible. But by rejecting the borough's role in this, I'm afraid you've rejected our support as well, so I'm sorry about that.
Thank you. Assembly Member Duval.
Sorry, I wasn't planning to speak in this debate because I think it's fairly straightforward. We can either go down one route of dealing with 33 individual local authorities determine the issues, and anyone who's been involved in local government, if we want to get consistency, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. Democracy will take place at local level at the planning meetings because they're in control of it. What we need is a London-wide policy which would go into the London plan and then be used by those at locally. So the spurious argument that's put forward of why the Conservatives can't support this today is just nonsense. What this amendment is, and I don't mind bylaws, I would welcome it. Local authorities that are sensible and progressive on this issue will adopt sensible bylaws and come forward. There will be some local authorities will sit on their hands and not do this, and not for democratic issues because it's just not a big issue for them. But it is a big issue for Londoners. It is a big issue for people that want to use spaces and know their rights in terms of what they can do and can't do in those areas. So this is straightforward. This is what the role of a strategic authority is. It's not about browbeating and telling local government what they have to do. It's saying this would be a sensible way forward on a London-wide policy. It is then down for local government at planning level to have those discussions about those individual developments, but taking it from a strategic plan. The bylaws issue is an option, but it's an option that is actually a do-nothing option for the majority of London, because we know there will never be a consistency among those 33 boroughs to move forward in one way. This way gives us that consistency to start with, and then I think we can move on forward. But we're not stifling local discussion very much. We're very supportive of the Andrew Boff approach on this side of the room, but actually it's the appropriate bit, and the appropriate bit is at the planning committees and within those local authorities for it to take place.
Okay. Any other speakers? No. Assembly Member Copley, you reserved your right.
No, I'm good, Chair.
Okay. Summation by Assembly Member Berry.
Thank you for a lively argument. I don't know if I can help either side on this. Obviously, I tabled the original motion with the bylaws clause at the end, but that was to be in addition to things that you might establish at the planning stage. And I'm not against having supplementary planning guidance to set some important principles for free access, which we all want at the planning stage. What I am concerned about is what happens next. You know, how we can challenge rules that were set in place, maybe they don't apply anymore. You know, if hoverboards eventually get invented, do we need to have the ability for the landowner to come back and apply for the ability to say no hoverboards on my land because it's not suitable? We do need a process, and the thing about the bylaws is the process there already does exist, and we've seen recently, you know, bylaws for our parks changed to allow barbecuing in Camden and Islington, for example, and there was an announcement and a process, and people could make representations. So to invent a new process for making changes later, that's what I'm slightly less worried about. But none of that is ruled out or in by this motion. The chance of having an SPG is there. The chance of adopting the bylaws process is there as well. We're asking for rules and for a process. So I don't see why anyone in this chamber cannot vote for the amended motion. It is very interesting. It's something we might want to look at further, you know, as the London plan comes forwards, and talk about in a committee when we're not having to vote at the end. But for now, can we all vote for this, please? Thank you.
No, sorry.
Okay, let's go to the vote. Can I see those in favour of the motion as amended?
14.
Can I see those against? 7. The motion as amended is passed with 14 votes. There were 7 votes against. Thank you. Let's then move to the next motion, 6.2, motion in the name of Assembly Member Duval.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think there's some very good work that's going on at every level of governance in this city and across the nation, and in every community in terms of tackling domestic violence. Government has already committed itself in this part of the Parliament to some further legislation to look at domestic violence. There's some constant talking about that. We know that the Mayor is convening in the autumn his Domestic Violence Forum to take some further soundings, and we know that people working hard at local level, both police, local government in their various partnerships, to do the best. But this motion is against the background of where this, there is rising crime in terms of that. 4 in 10 of the survivors of domestic violence are repeat offenders. And, why this was, and many will recall the question I asked of the Mayor, what this came about and why, I did some work and a bit more delving. I've always been interested about the policing side of that from working on the MPA about tackling domestic violence, of the tragedy of a murder of a 5-year-old in my constituency. Now, so in terms of that, what this motion proposes is a further step change, and it builds on some of the good work that's been done in the past by legislation. It would require national legislation. It could not be done just as London go it alone. But basically, it is about managing the risk of those found guilty of domestic violence. It would be about increasing protection of victims and any children in any relationship, and also putting the onus back on the real perpetrators of these crimes. So simply, it is about establishing a register, and the register would operate simply on the basis of the Sexual Offences Act. It would actually put some further conditions on those who have been convicted of domestic violence about declaring new relationships if they have established them, and where they live. The tragedy in Lewisham, no one knew this individual had moved into this area. And when I tell you, because some of you may remember what I said to the Mayor, but I'm going to say it again because we need to be reminded about what these men of violence do. The murderer of the 5-year-old had carried out, as part of his crime, 6 different attacks on 5 ex-partners. Right? He managed to attack a 13-year-old boy in a relationship, punching and kicking him in the head as he tried to protect his mother from an attack. In 2012, he knocked an ex-girlfriend unconscious after she refused to lend him his phone, with her requiring surgery to fix her jaw subsequently after the attack. A year later, he throttled a new partner when she told him he could only have a duplicate son's birth certificate. One wonders why he needed it. Instead of the original. This person also had a career of violence, right? He struck a shopkeeper with an hammer and a wooden chair while raiding a jeweller's in 2001. He managed to try and fend him away with the chair, but the individual repeatedly smashed him over the head with it. Truly, this is a man of violence. I want to get across of the type of individuals, albeit they're a minority in our community, who caused such crimes as this. He had other histories in terms of crimes. So what this register would have done would have put that onus on that individual to have said to the police, I've moved from my address, I've moved into the area, and I've established a new relationship. All the other laws are very important in terms of domestic violence. In this particular case, the partner did not know about Sarah's law, and there are some issues and the processes of going about to get that information. If the police were able to manage and prioritise risks of these offenders, they would have worked out that actually a new relationship, the woman should be advised that she may be at risk and her child may be at risk. And that's why I'm proposing the register of this. There's some really interesting work that we will receive as an Assembly and Police and Crime Committee from the police about trying to move forward on this issue in their own way. The one way would be to do this is there's a certain way of a community order, but it's very bureaucratic and it takes a long time. I don't want to propose systems to the police that are going to be overburdensome. What this system will do was help the police to prioritise risk in terms of protecting the victims and protecting any children in the relationship. And therefore I think it's fairly straightforward. We have done this before. We've been the first to ask Parliament about smoking in public places. We will be the first calling officially for this to do. It's been well received by many of the national and voluntary groups. I got some very good publicity on the back of this. I think this makes sense that we could be part of starting that debate. It may take time, but I think this would add to the range of tools that would actually seek to try to protect both victims and their children, as I said before. Thank you very much. I move.
Thank you. I'd like to formally second the motion and reserve my right to speak, and then open the debate. Sorry? Oh, there's an amendment. Can I call on Assembly Member Boff to move his amendment?
Thank you. And this is a very supportive amendment. I've been on the back of a really good report published by London Assembly Labour, and we welcome that as an important piece of work in the fight against domestic violence. It's supportive in terms that I do think this Assembly has never stood back from mentioning minorities and standing up for the rights of minorities. And why, without any doubt whatsoever, I state very clearly that domestic violence does disproportionately affect women. It also, in some cases, does affect men as the victim as well. And we're talking about not all domestic arrangements are heterosexual, and indeed, in some cases, we have situations where the perpetrator is in fact a woman. Now, I'm not in any way trying to say that this is a very large sum, but they are a minority, and it would be good to include those within the report. That being said, I think this is a marvellous step forward for victims of domestic violence, or rather future victims of domestic violence, because with a register, there will at least be the opportunity of alerting them to the fact that the relationship they're about to enter into is one that may indeed be risky to them. So we welcome it, and I would hope that the mover of the motion can accept the amendment.
Thank you. Can I have a seconder? Is that Assembly Member Prince?
Yeah, I second the motion and reserve my right. Thank you.
Thank you. Assembly Member Duval, do you accept the amendment?
Chair, I accept the amendment. Thank
you. Let's move then to debate the amended motion. Assembly Member Bailey.
I was really grateful when I read this piece of work. It is so important. As many of you know, I've been a youth worker for over 20 years now, and most of the children that I've dealt with in the most troubled families, the root cause has been domestic violence. And the ability for this to be hidden in a community and be rife is incredible. And the damage it does, not only to the direct people who are being affected by the domestic violence, but the grandparents, the mothers, the aunties, the sisters, everyone, is incredible. It generates fear on a level that is hard to measure. So the importance of this work, and I'm so proud that as the London Assembly we are trying to push this forward and start this debate, because there's very few things I've come across that can materially change the life of young people and entire communities in a way that this potentially should be adopted. So I'm very happy to put my name to this. I cannot express to you what an important piece of work this is, in my opinion. Thank you.
Assembly Member Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to very briefly welcome the amendment from Assembly Member Boff. I actually think, although the statistics usually show that 80% of the perpetrators are male and 80% of the people impacted by domestic abuse are female, that does still leave 20% of perpetrators who may be women, and also 20% of victims who can be men. And I actually do think it's particularly welcome, because I actually think it's more difficult in some ways. I think it's dreadful that women are abused, but I actually think in some ways it's even more difficult for men to come forward and to admit, particularly if it's been a woman or another man in a relationship, and perhaps they're not completely open about their personal private arrangements. So I think this amendment is to be welcomed, and I'm glad that we've accepted it, and I hope everyone unanimously supports this motion. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Right, so let's go to the vote. Those in favour of the motion as amended?
It's unanimous, Chair.
It's unanimous. Thank you very much. Hand over to Deputy, as I will be moving the next motion.
Right, I put the next motion, which is that the Assembly urges the Mayor to take a tougher line on tube noise with Transport for London.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Colleagues, in moving this motion on the increasingly detrimental impact of tube noise and vibration, I just want to briefly touch on the incident and the effect on the lives of very many Londoners. The incident. I've been dealing with tube noise and associated vibration now for about 10 years. And I just get on with the work, working with TfL, working with my constituents. And in one instance, it has taken about 8 years for us to reach a point where we now know what the summer remedy is, the autumn remedy is, the winter remedy is. It gets that complicated. But what I'm seeing, and I'm sure a number, and I know from colleagues in my group, what we're experiencing, and I know that other colleagues are experiencing, is the absolutely unacceptable increase. The incidence of tube noise and vibration disturbance is spread across London and is spreading fast. It is, though, concentrated centrally. The tube lines generating the most complaints are the Northern, Victoria Central, Piccadilly and Jubilee lines. Most of the issues are to do with ground-borne noise and vibration from underground and subsurface lines. We now have the increasing casework to deal with that's linked to night tube lines. So let me just touch on the effects. TfL has measured noise levels at 52 decibels inside homes. I was going to try and bring that level to you, but then I would be accused of grievous bodily damage, grievous harm to you. And also, that increases when two tubes pass at once, and that's residents living over the Victoria, Piccadilly and the Northern Line. They're doing their own recordings. This level far exceeds the World Health Organization's recommended levels of 35 dBs on average for reasonable sleep. Notice the difference. Recommended 35 World Health. TfL, through the running of the service, 52 decibels inside homes. There's also, you would expect then, the associated problems, sleep disturbance, just the quality of life seriously damaged. And my constituents who are affected by the Victoria, Piccadilly and Northern Line, they report to me that on a bad day or bad time in their homes, the fittings are shaking because of vibrations. The fittings are shaking. They themselves are vibrating. Can you imagine living like that? It's totally unacceptable. And I'm not even going to go into that, the homes where there are babies and children, because can you imagine that? That's just awful. So we heard, and I think my colleague's going to touch on that when we had a meeting of the Environment Committee, then we had Londoners come in to report their experience and the damage this is having on them physically and mentally and economically. Many have moved out of their homes and, they've moved out of their homes for their own well-being and they've tried to rent this house because they needed the income to pay the rent. And then, of course, their tenants have moved on. So there is economic impact on this. So, colleagues, please support this motion, which urges the Mayor to take a tougher line on tube noise with Transport for London. Now, there is a letter from the Mayor back to Assemblymember Dismore following Assemblymember Dismore's presentation of petitions. And I've seen that letter, and I welcome what the Mayor's saying, but I'm saying to the Mayor, and hope you'll agree, that we need more action than what's proposed in his letter. What I would ask that you support is that TfL consider other measures to reduce tube noise, such as slowing trains where appropriate and effecting sound barriers. It'll affect us all, but think of those people who are suffering and having intolerable lives. And that in addition, TfL should also dedicate more staff towards liaising with the public, some of whom are greatly distressed at very high levels of noise. I also would urge you to support TfL looking to introduce a proper compensation scheme for those affected, and in exceptional circumstances, TfL must take responsibility for those severely affected. Finally, in view of what's been said, I would ask us to support that TfL adopt internationally recognised noise threshold that I've mentioned before, and so that no Londoner should be asked to live with noise above 40 decibel levels. Thank you.
Assembly Member Cooper to second.
Thank you very much, Deputy Chair. I won't repeat the eloquence that Assemblymember Arnold has brought to this discussion of tube noise, and I've not been dealing with it for anywhere near as long as she has, but I was first contacted in January by people suffering from tube noise in various parts of London. And there are about 50 in my constituency, people who live near the South Wimbledon tube station, that I'm in regular contact with. And it is an extremely difficult issue because it is now, we've got these tube lines that have been around for a really long period of time. It's clearly more associated with the ones that have been installed for longer. But also we're now running the system even hotter than we were before. I mean, we've got real frequency on all the lines for all the trains, which we absolutely need to keep London open and keep London moving. But we also now are running a number of the lines through the night. And of course, in the case where people have been suffering from the tube noise, particularly clustered around the northern and the Victoria and the central, that has now become completely unbearable for them. So pursuing TfL and discussing with them a whole range of different solutions has been something, having invited in our guests to the Environment Committee, that I've been picking up with TfL. But the other side of it that I still see, and I think there has been some progress on that, and I know Assemblymember Prince has been working on this, as well as Assemblymember Arnold and Assemblymember Dismore. But I still do not see any improvement when people copy me in when they are writing to TfL. So for me, there is still much that needs to be done to improve the way that TfL staff are liaising with members of the public and also councillors. I've been copied in by councillors and they're writing to TfL, and in many cases they're just simply not really getting answers, or nothing is being done at all. So for me, I really want to see that part of the motion. I really do want to see that where people are suffering incredible distress, and sometimes their emails display that distress, that we have some dedicated staff who are able to deal with them at a point of extreme difficulty. I would commend the motion to you, and I hope you'll all vote in favour of it. Thank you.
Assembly Member Devonish.
I think when I look at the issues that we cover in this Assembly, there's no bigger issue than this. And I think in the last year particularly, I've heard many normal Londoners talk about how they have a very low opinion of those of us that hold public office. And when you actually try and drill into the detail of why they think that, they often say we talk too much about things we have no control over and actually don't sort out the problems we do have control. This has been my #1 issue as an Assembly member in all my 15 months. I have been battling with TfL for the whole of that period. I'd like to pay tribute to the chairman because she's taken this up. And I think she has twice actually held the Mayor to account more than most of us. Once on the overall customer services philosophy of TfL, which the Mayor was embarrassed 3 question times ago. Frankly, TfL's customer service is not fit for the 21st century, not only on tube noise, but on many things. But on tube noise specifically, my residents keep on getting, they now get the courtesy of a response, which a year ago they didn't, but the response says either we can do no more, or it's somebody else's fault, such as basement developers, or we'll come and measure the noise again. You know, I need to apologise now to my residents because I failed, frankly, on this particular issue, I particularly wanted to apologise to Mrs Clark, who is a mother with a young baby, who writes to me virtually every week, and we keep on giving her the same answer: more readings, more readings, more readings. At the last mayor question time, the chairman and other assembly members got the mayor to agree to a meeting. That was in mid-August. I have chased through my office on at least 10 occasions. We do not. There's a letter that was referred to by the chairman, which I haven't seen from the mayor, but as far as I'm concerned, there was no date set by the mayor to meet with assembly members and residents on this issue. It's 15 months for me. It's much longer for some of my colleagues. People across Westminster, the Royal Borough and Hammersmith and Fulham write to me weekly on this. It is not good enough. It makes us all look absolutely appalling. We have a managerial, technocratic response from TfL. I know they're engineers on the whole. They're very good technically, but we are the politicians. We need to get a grip on this, get the meeting with the mayor and sort this out for our residents. That's what we're here for.
Assembly Member Prince. Thank you, Deputy Chair. I want to start a slightly different way. I have to say that my experience with TfL is that they have been trying very, very hard to solve these problems. They've been grinding rails, they've been sticking things underneath the rails, they've been sticking things to the side of the rails. But the irony of it is that certainly as far as surface noise is concerned, I have a number of residents who like the chairs getting 50 plus decibels at night, which is well over the World Health Organization limit. And they did this really innovative thing to the rail, and they said, oh yes, right next to the rail there's a 10% drop in the dB. When they measured it in the house, of course it made no difference whatsoever. Now, colleagues have mentioned about slowing down the trains. Yes, that will have some effect. But what TfL have said to me is that it's virtually impossible to slow down the trains just at a given time, because they have to have a man go along with a key or something, and he has to lock it and unlock it, and then of course later on in the evening or the morning he has to undo what he's already done. So that's worrying in itself, but clearly they're saying that is not a solution. Well, I'm sorry, if the solution for people being able to sleep at night is that the trains have to run slower at night, then I'm sorry, they're going to have to run slower during the day as well then, if they can't change it. But what really concerns me is, yes, I really accept that TfL have tried everything they can, but fact is, they have failed. They are not getting the levels of noise down. So if we were in any other industry, if it was the private sector, I mean, I lived in a house that had a ring road built around it, and, well, not all around it, but a bit of it, and I got compensation. You know, I got excellent hundreds of pounds compensation, so I could put double glazing in to mitigate the extra noise that I was expected to do. And I think that's where we are. I think if they've tried all the technology that is available, they have a moral duty. The mayor has a moral duty to these people who've been inflicted with this pain to actually come up with a compensation package. And frankly, this should have all been thought about and looked at before the lines were open. I know that, and I don't want to get political, I know we were in a rush to get the night tube going, and I know it has a number of benefits for the London-wide economy, but these things should have been considered and looked at, and the potential cost of this should have been added in to the proposals when we went to having a night tube service. So I totally agree with this motion, support that's already been said, but I do think we need to impress on the mayor that he has a duty and TfL have a duty to our residents to either sort it, which they can't, or give them compensation. Thank you.
Assembly Member Pidgeon.
Very much. I'm delighted to support this motion today because it's so important, and whilst I may have had the occasional issue in the past on tube noise which would come up from across London, the inbox has gone up so much in the last year or so, particularly obviously since the night tube has come on. And obviously noise affects people differently. Some people, you know, sleep very deeply, you know, that they wouldn't wake up for anything. But other people, this is having such an impact on their quality of life. They're not able to live in their own homes because of the impact of it. And I think it's really important, one of the elements in this motion, about having more staff. The team, I think, are working you know, within their limited resources, but we need more staff so that they're able to really better serve our constituents across the capital. There is also an issue that came up when I did a site visit with the team out in West London, where actually some new high-rise blocks had gone up. So it's not just the idea that these basement developments are causing sort of noise issues and bouncing the noise of the tube around. Actually, high-rise blocks are also having an issue with some of the tube lines as they go outside, and we need to consider that as part of the London plan as well, the impact of noise. And I know it's very technical, but that needs to be looked at, I think, as well. The motion sets out some of the really good steps that they're trying to do, grinding rails, all these other things, but they need to look at other measures, as has been suggested, and they need to even look at things that are very expensive, like I think it's called floating track. When we did a site visit with to look at Crossrail recently, underneath the Barbican, they have put in very, very expensive floating track, to help deal with vibration and noise. Well, it may be that in certain places that sort of thing is going to have to be looked at if that could be a solution to this noise, whatever the cost that might be. I think getting on top of this is really important, not just for the lines now, but if we're looking at expanding the night tube to things like the City branch of the Northern Line, the London Overground, which opens up a whole new area of potential noise. We really need to resolve these before we roll this out further, because it is having such an impact on so many people across the capital.
Assembly Member Arnold to sum up.
Yes, Chair, just briefly, I'd like to thank colleagues for their support and for the testimonies and for bringing this thing together. I just do want to put on record my, I think Assembly Member Prince said it, the staff that are doing the job at the moment are doing the best that they can. And that's why we need extra staff. I would commend the work that the current liaison manager is doing. I'm speaking to him twice a day, and I resist speaking to him at night because, like, you know, that goes too far. You speak to him at night, right? So it is about saying that we understand how complex the thing is. It just needs now a real focus, and I think it has to be a mayoral focus because it's a pan-London issue. It's affecting babies in their cots. It's affecting so many constituents. And I would just ask, and I don't know this, I would just ask officers to look to see if the transcript of this discussion can be attached to the motion so that when the mayor and his officers see it, they see that this isn't us getting into Luddite mode. This isn't us attacking the great success that we've had with the transport infrastructure. This is about us on behalf of Londoners saying we want the success, we want our successful city, but we also demand a quality to our lives, and we also need to be able to sleep in our beds at night. Thank you very much.
Those in favour of the motion, please show. Looks like unanimity. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Back to you, Chairman.
Okay. Members agree to suspend standing orders to finish the business. Agreed. Thank you very much. Okay, let's go on. Let's go on to the next motion. Motion 6.4 in the name of Assembly Member Wolf.
Thank you, Chair. I'm hoping that this motion will receive some support from the Assembly. The Assembly's record on opposing inappropriate airport projects has been a good one. If you'd have decided to place an airport on a clean sheet of paper, you wouldn't choose to place an airport where it is most with a huge population of people likely to be affected by the noise, and in an area that is already congested. People were tolerant of the airport when they believed it was for military purposes. They recognised that it was performing a particular function, and the flights weren't that many. In fact, one of the few things I ever heard, because I cut my political teeth under the flight path of Northolt Airport, and I do remember the comments from some residents of Ickenham, for example, who used to say, well, we don't mind because it's the Queen flying over us, so we're going to, we put up with it. Actually, they're not going to put up with these flights becoming more commercialised, and I would hope that the Assembly can support this motion to once again perform our function of putting a shot across the bows of those people who are not thinking about the quality of life of London residents. Thank you.
Assembly Member Bailey to second.
I just quickly say, I think this amendment, I think this is in motion is particularly important because of the project ARC that the MOD asked the Ernst & Young to carry out to see how many extra flights could have, to say that RF Norfolk could take 50,000 flights a year. And what that is suggesting is a direction of travel. And I think supporting this amendment will put, as my colleague said, put a shot across their bows to say it is not acceptable. We have seen what's going on and we are opposing that on behalf of Londoners. To fly that many planes of the people on a regular basis, I don't think is the right thing to do, particularly because it's an RAF facility, it hasn't had the same level of scrutiny that a normal commercial airport would have. So I think this motion is very important, and I'm happy to second.
Thank you. Debate is open. Assembly Member Dr. Sahota.
Thank you, Chair. I rise to speak because RAF Northolt is a constituency, and I too am concerned about the impact these commercial flights are having on the residents of Northolt, Ruislip and Uxbridge, and also the way it's been done, that there hasn't been proper consultation on this matter. If we were talking about airport expansion anywhere else, like in Heathrow or the city airport, there's a proper consultation. But the reason this has all happened, right, is because of the unstrategic review of defence spending in 2010. There has been a huge impact on the defence budget, and the RAF Northolt has had to increase its commercial flights to keep up the funding streams for RAF Northolt. Now, this is a decision really for the Ministry of Defence to say, is RAF Northolt viable as a military unit, or is it not? And if it is not, then they can, of course, shift the RAF Northolt military operations to any nearby airport. Of course, this will be a very sad event for the citizens of West London because they have a lot of affection for RAF Northolt from the time they remember in defending London, particularly in the Battle of Britain, and also that the Royal Flight leaves from Northolt. But of course, London Borough of Ealing, recognising this, Labour Council recognising this in earlier this year, when the Mayor asked for the City for Londoners, did put forward a proposal that there should be something like 20,000 homes put on here, that this is not a viable military operation, and that we can expand a sort of a Northolt village, right, with housing and jobs and accommodation. In contrast, of course, the Linden Council were quite happy to put a Heathrow village and move the airport away from West London into the estuary. But the difference was this: by doing that, they would have destroyed the economy of West London. If you replace the military functions of Northolt into nearby operations, you will actually add and enhance the area around here. So I am happy to support this, and so as with the Labour Group, particularly because we feel that the way it's been done right is wrong, and residents should not be suffering from this. But the reason it's happened right is because of the defence cuts that have been imposed by this government on the military, right? And that's what's wrong with it. Thank you.
Thank you. Assembly Member Curtin.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'm very, very happy to support this motion, and it's something that I did indeed ask the Mayor about in Mayor's Question Time in July. So it's good to see this has been proposed by Assembly Members Boff and Bailey. local residents have written to me, and I know that they're very, very concerned about the developments in Northolt and the change of use, it seems, by stealth from a military airport and airbase to a commercial airport. Not officially, and still the majority of commercial flights are private jets, but I understand that Flybe, a big commercial airliner, are making moves to try to use Northolt. And the resurfacing apparently is going to cost £45 million, which will come out of the Ministry of Defence budget. Why on earth is there such a large amount of money being spent on resurfacing the runway when we're being told that there's no real plan to change the use? Those things don't add up in my mind. So it would be good for us to ask the Mayor to do even more than he's promised to do already, and to work with the local community and the local boroughs to do everything possible to investigate this and stop this from becoming, in effect, Heathrow's third runway or fourth runway. Thank you.
Assembly Member Shaw.
Thank you, Chair. This is an issue as well that I have been lobbying for quite some time on behalf of local residents, particularly on the border of Harrow, as well as campaigners like Stop Northolt campaign. So I'm pleased to support this motion today. I have raised questions to the Mayor and written to him for his support on a number of occasions. I'm pleased that the Mayor is fully aware of the plight of local residents and is supportive. When I submitted a written question on this issue a few months ago, the Mayor said RF Northolt exists to fulfill a particular role for the UK government, and I would be greatly concerned if it sought to broaden its activity with growth in its commercial operations. He added that he would continue to monitor the situation and seek to ensure that no changes occur at RAF Northolt without the consent of local communities. I wrote to him further an email, and he wrote to me in which he categorically stated that he does not support a change in the use of RAF Northolt. The formal powers of the Mayor on aviation, however, are limited. Therefore, the Deputy Mayor for Transport, Val Shawcross, has been pressing the government to require a meaningful consultation with residents before any changes were to take place in the airspace. So there is clearly a support. I do welcome this motion, as I've said. It highlights the cross-party, our collective concerns about what's going on at RF Northolt, and therefore what's going on is clearly unacceptable, and we must continue collectively, together with the Mayor, to press very, very, very hard the government to first of all stop any move towards commercial operations, and if there were going to be any change, there is proper consultation right across the board of the residents who are obviously affected by such changes. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Assemblymember Russell.
Thank you. I want to give the Green Group's wholehearted support for this motion. It's absolutely wrong that communities in Hillingdon, Ealing and Harrow join residents near and not so near City Airport and Heathrow to face that everyday blight of noise, pollution and also increased traffic as more passengers attempt to access what is currently a military airport, which seems to be expanding to run more and more commercial flights. And this stealth expansion at Northolt is just reckless if seen in the context of our climate commitments. Climate change is intensifying extreme weather events and should be front and foremost in our minds, given current events turning people's lives upside down across the globe. We currently have devastating flooding in India, record-breaking rainfall from Hurricane Harvey in Houston, and last night, Hurricane Irma's unprecedented winds of 180 miles an hour, laying waste to communities in Puerto Rico and across the Caribbean. It's been declared the longest lasting severe storm on record. Whether you look at the big picture and climate change, or the hyper-local situation for people in Northolt, Ruislip and Uxbridge, any commercial flights at Northolt should be shown the door. I support the motion.
Thank you. Assembly Member Pigeon.
Thank you very much. I'm really pleased to see this motion before us today, and it's absolutely vital. The Ministry of Defence can't operate differently to other airports in terms of consultation with local community and planning requirements that are required for commercial flights. This has been expansion by the back door, a huge increase in private flights, luxury jets flying in from the like of Monaco and so for that all-important business meeting at a huge cost to the local community. And as already has been mentioned, we know there are some airlines who are pushing to get access to Northolt, wanting to use it as a feeder to Heathrow. It's really, really of concern. I've asked questions of the Mayor on this. I've encouraged colleagues in Parliament to do the same, because I think this has just been a creep of expansion that's been going on. And the local community absolutely deserve to be treated the same way as anyone else living near an airport, and we have enough of those across London. And also, actually, there's the other side of the argument. Other commercial airports should not be put at disadvantage by the government being able to not observe the same processes that they would have to go to if they wanted to expand or change their practices at their airports. So I think it's really important that a light is shone on this issue, and I hope we can really raise this with the Mayor and the government to get proper action on this expansion.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Assembly Member Boff, summation?
Yes, thank you very much. I'm grateful to the members for, it appears like we're going to get a motion together, perhaps not all for the same reasons, but we're going to get consent to the motion. I'm grateful to Assembly Member Dr. Sahota about the criticism of the consultation. I'm a bit dubious about, blaming the cuts on this. If they wanted to make money, they'd have just sold it for housing. They would have made loads of money out of that, the Ministry of Defence. Very grateful to Assembly Member Shah for reminding us that, confirming that the Mayor generally supports us, and I hope this motion gets another affirmation of that support, because, of course, his predecessor, Boris Johnson, also opposed the development of Northolt. As I say, I won't say I'm entirely supportive of everything Assembly Member Russell said about air travel, but there's appropriate air travel and there's inappropriate air travel, as there are inappropriate airports and appropriate airports, though you'd probably disagree with me that there is any such thing as an appropriate airport. So I welcome that, and I hope that we can move forward with some sterling opposition to this daft plan, which seems to so completely ignore the opinions and the interests of London's residents. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's then go to the vote. All those in favour of the motion?
Unanimous again.
Unanimous. Thank you very much. Okay, we're doing well, but we're now going to go to item 7, mayoral commitments. Can the Assembly note the commitment made by the Mayor Sadiq Khan during the London Assembly Mayor's Question Time meeting held between February 27, 2017 and August 2017? Thank you. Item 8, the next meeting of the London Assembly is scheduled to be the Mayor's Question Time meeting, which will take place at 10 a.m. on Thursday, 14th September 2017 in the Chamber, and will be chaired by Deputy Chair, Assembly Member Arbour. Item 9, any other business. Just to say, members, I know that you will join me in thanking Vishal, our Principal Committee Manager, for his excellent contribution to the work of the Assembly, and give him a round of applause. He's got a new job in Harrow. Harrow. So our loss is Harrow's gain. We wish you all the very best. And I've been teasing him because of the new baby, but I hear the baby sleeping 6 hours now, so Harrow will have his full attention. Okay, thank you very much. Members, it's photo time.
Nope.
It's been cancelled.
Oh, is it being cancelled? Nobody told me.
Cancelled.
I put my best cardi on.
You always look nice, Jill.
Thank you. And you, the things now to go to. Thank you.
I know that Isaac Bizio would really appreciate an opportunity to take